Jordan Belfort. Way of the Wolf. Number 1. Cracking the code for sales and influence. Don't you guys get it? Every sale is the same. The first time I uttered those words to a roomful of salesmen was on a Tuesday evening in 1988, and what I got in return were some very confused looks. They were looks that so much as said, "What the hell are you talking about, Jordan? Every sale is not the same. Every sale is different. Our prospects all have different needs, different beliefs, different values, different objections, and different pain points. So how could every sale possibly be the same?" In retrospect, I can see their point. In fact, I can see all their points, the points of the millions upon millions of people who have attended my straight line seminars all over the world and who have cocked their heads to the side and narrowed their eyes skeptically when I got up on stage and said, with absolute certainty, that every sale is the same. After all, it seems like a rather far-fetched notion, doesn't it? I mean, even if you put aside the obvious points that I listed above, how could every sale possibly be the same? Take the countless number of goods and services for sale in the global marketplace. They too are all different. Take the personal financial situations of your prospects. They're all different too. And take the unique sets of preconceived notions that each prospect brings with them into the sale, not just about your product but also about you, about trusting salespeople in general, and about the decision-making process itself as it relates to buying. Again, they're all different. Indeed, when you take all the apparent differences that can pop up in a sale at any time, it comes as no surprise that only a tiny percentage of the population feels comfortable at the thought of entering a situation that requires sales and influence. The rest of the world actively shies away from it despite knowing how absolutely crucial it is to the achievement of wealth and success. Even worse, among those very select few who do feel comfortable, only a tiny percentage of them will ever attain the status of being a top producer. The rest will plod along somewhere in the middle, stuck in the muck and mire of mediocrity and averagism. They learn just enough to keep selling worthwhile. After all, even a decent salesperson will make more money closing sales than in a non-sales related job, but they'll never experience the financial freedom of being a top producer. It will always remain just out of reach. It's a sad reality, for sure, but such is the plight of any salesperson who believes that every sale is different. A discovery that hit me like an atomic bomb and led directly to the creation of the straight line system. My discovery didn't come about slowly. It came all at once during an emergency sales training session I held in Stratton's original boardroom. At the time, I had only 12 brokers working for me, and at this particular moment, precisely 7:15 p.m. on that very Tuesday evening, they were sitting directly across from me and wearing those confused, skeptical expressions that I would come to know so well. As the story goes, exactly 4 weeks prior to that, I had stumbled upon an untapped niche in the retail stock market, which was selling $5 stocks to the richest 1% of Americans. For whatever reason, no one on Wall Street had ever tried it before, and when I tested the idea myself, the results were so incredible that I decided to completely reinvent the firm. At the time, Stratton was selling penny stocks to average moms and pops, and we were having massive success since the day the firm opened. In fact, by the end of our third month, the average broker, or Strattonite, as they like to call themselves, was already earning more than $12,000 in monthly commission, and one of them was earning more than triple that. That broker was none other than Danny Porsche, my future junior partner, who would end up being immortalized on the silver screen by a slimmed-down, buck-toothed version of Jonah Hill, who loosely portrayed him in the movie The Wolf of Wall Street. Whatever the case, Danny was the first person I'd ever taught how to sell penny stocks, and as luck would have it, he turned out to be a born salesperson, like me. At the time, we both worked at a small penny stock firm called the Investor Center, and Danny was my assistant. When I left to open Stratton, I brought Danny with me, and he'd been my right-hand man ever since. In fact, it was Danny who wrote that first massive buy ticket with a wealthy investor on the 5th day of the test. His commission on this one single trade was $72,000, an amount so incomprehensibly large that if I hadn't seen it for myself, I wouldn't have believed it. To give you some perspective, it was over 100 times greater than the average commission on a penny stock trade. It was nothing short of a total game changer. To this very day, I'll never forget the look on Danny's face when he walked into my office holding that golden buy ticket, and I'll also never forget looking out into the boardroom myself a few moments later after I'd regained my composure and seeing my entire future unfold right before my eyes. In that very instant, I knew that this would be the last day that Stratton ever sold penny stocks to anyone. What, with the massive financial firepower that a wealthy investor could bring to bear, it simply didn't make sense to cold call average moms and pops ever again. It was as simple as that. All that was left to do was to teach the Strattonites how to close rich people, and the rest, as they say, would be history. Unfortunately, as they also say, easier said than done. As it turned out, training a bunch of barely post-adolescent nincompoops to go toe-to-toe with America's wealthiest investors was far more challenging than I could have ever possibly anticipated. In fact, it turned out to be totally fucking impossible. After 4 weeks of cold calling, the Strattonites hadn't closed a single new account. Not even one. Even worse, because it was my idea to make the switch, the brokers were holding me personally responsible for their current state of misery. In essence, they had gone from earning $12,000 a month to making $0 a month, and I had run out of ideas on how to train them. And make no mistake, I had tried everything. After failing miserably with my own system, I read through countless books on sales, listened to tapes, attended local seminars, I even flew clear across the country to Los Angeles, California, to attend a 3-day sales seminar that was purported to have the world's greatest sales trainers all under one roof. But again, I came up empty-handed. Disturbing as it was, after one full month of intelligence gathering, the most valuable piece of intelligence that I'd been able to gather was that my own system of training was far more advanced than anything else out there, and if that wasn't cutting it, where was I to go from there? I was starting to think that maybe it was just impossible. Perhaps the Strattonites were simply constitutionally incapable of closing rich people. They were too young and too uneducated to be taken seriously by them. Yet how would that explain the massive success that Annie and I were still having? As we continued to dial through our leads, my personal closing rate had climbed to over 50% by now, and Annie's was in the low 30s. How could we all be dialing through the same leads, using the same script, pitching the same stock, and yet getting such dramatically different results? It was enough to make a person insane, or even worse, to make them jump ship. By the end of week 4, the Strattonites had basically given up. They were desperate to go back to the world of penny stocks and were teetering on the edge of mutiny. So there I was at the front of the boardroom, desperate for a breakthrough. What I was about to realize, however, was that I'd actually just made one. Looking back at that moment now, standing before the brokers and trying to explain how every sale is the same, I would have never guessed how close I was to inventing the world's most powerful sales training system. You see, when I said that every sale is the same, what I meant that night, and what turned out to be one of the most profound ideas I've ever had, is that despite all those aforementioned differences, individual needs, objections, values, pain points, despite all that stuff, the same 3 key elements must still line up in any prospect's mind before you have a shot at closing them. Let me repeat that. The reason every sale is the same is because, despite all that individual stuff, the same 3 key elements still have to line up in any prospect's mind before you have a shot at closing them. And it doesn't matter what you're selling or how you're selling it, how much it costs or how much money the prospect has, and whether it's tangible or intangible, over the phone or in person. If in a single moment in time, you can create these 3 crucial elements in a prospect's mind, then you've got an excellent shot of closing. Conversely, if even one of them is missing, you have basically no shot at all. The 3 tens. We call these 3 core elements the 3 tens, with the context being a prospect's current state of certainty on a scale from 1 to 10. For example, if a prospect is currently at a 10 on the certainty scale, then it means he or she is in a state of absolute certainty at that moment. Conversely, if the prospect's currently at a 1, then they are in a state of absolute uncertainty at that moment. Now, in sales, when we talk about certainty, the first thing that pops into people's minds is certainty about the actual product being sold. In other words, before there's any chance of a prospect buying a product, they first have to be absolutely certain that the product makes sense to them, insofar as it filling their needs, eliminating any pain they might have, being a good value for the money, and so forth. So the first of the 3 tens is your product. The 3 tens. 1. The product, idea, or concept. 2. 3. In essence, your prospect must be absolutely certain that they love your product. Or as we like to say with the straight line system, your prospect must think it's the best thing since sliced bread. This includes both tangible products like cars, boats, houses, food, clothing, consumer products, and all the various services people perform, and also intangible products like ideas and concepts and values and beliefs, or any vision you might have for the future. Over the years, I've found that the simplest and most effective way to explain the 3 tens is to imagine a continuum of certainty like the one below. Now, notice how on the very right end of the continuum, you have the number 10. This represents your prospect being in a state of absolute certainty about the value and efficacy of your product, or put more simply, your prospect absolutely loves it. For example, if you were to ask this prospect what they thought about your product, a dead honest answer would sound something like, "Oh my God, it's literally the best thing since sliced bread. Not only does it fill all my needs, but it's also a great value for the money. I can only imagine how great I'm going to feel when I get to use it in the future. It'll be like having a huge weight lifted off my shoulders." That's a 10 on the certainty scale. Your prospect absolutely loves your product, and they're damn sure of it. Then, over on the very left end of the continuum, you have the number 1. This represents your prospect being in a state of absolute uncertainty about the value and efficacy of your product, or put more simply, they think it's a total piece of shit. In this case, if you were to ask your prospect the same question as above, they would say something along the lines of, "That product of yours is the biggest piece of shit I've seen in my life. In fact, not only is it completely overpriced, but it also looks like shit, works like shit, feels like shit, and it's actually built like shit. So the sooner you get that piece of shit out of my sight, the happier I'll be." That's a 1 on the certainty scale. Your prospect absolutely despises your product, and it's going to be difficult to change their mind. Then, along the continuum's middle, you have the varying degrees of certainty, between a 1 and a 10, with the number 5 representing a state of pure ambivalence. That's where your prospect isn't leaning one way or the other. In normal sales parlance, this is referred to as your prospect sitting on the fence, an expression specifically meant to highlight the delicate nature of the state. However, with the straight line system, we view a 5 in a far more positive light. In fact, to a seasoned straight liner, a prospect who is at a 5 has a big sign on their chest saying, "Please influence me now. I can't make up my mind, so please help me." The important thing to remember here is that, while being at a 5 does, indeed, mean that your prospect is 50-50 on your product, it does not mean that you only have a 50-50 chance of closing them. The same thing goes for levels 3 and 7 on the certainty scale, which are basically mirror images of each other. In the case of a 3, your prospect thinks that your product is basically crap, although not nearly as crappy as if they were at a 1. And at a 7, your prospect thinks your product is great, although not nearly as great as if they were at a 10. In both of these cases, however, whether your prospect is at a 7 or a 3, there are 2 important things to remember. First, your prospect's feelings of certainty or uncertainty are less set in stone than if they were at the level to the right or the left of them. Secondly, their presence at either level does not directly translate into a better or worse chance of ultimately closing them. In other words, their current state of certainty is just that current. It is not permanent, and they are eagerly waiting to be influenced by you. Now, when it comes time to ask for the order, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the closer you've gotten your prospect to a 10, the better chance you have of closing them. On the other hand, the farther away your prospect is from a 10, the worse chance you have of closing them. From a practical standpoint, if your prospect is anywhere below a 5, you have basically no chance of closing them. The reason for this has to do with something called positive intent, which serves as the very foundation from which all human beings make their decisions. In other words, human beings don't buy things that they think will make their lives worse, they buy things that they think will make their lives better. However, the operative word here is think. You see, just because someone has positive intent doesn't necessarily mean that the resulting decisions will end up having a positive impact on them. In fact, with many people, it often doesn't. Their lives are punctuated by a series of self-defeating decisions. However, even these serial bad decision makers believe their decisions were good when they made them. That's the definition of positive intent. In consequence, when you ask for the order, if your prospect thinks that your product is shit, then you have absolutely no chance of closing them. Conversely, if they think the opposite is true, that your product is the best thing since sliced bread, then you have an excellent chance of closing them. It's basic logic, right? So, let me ask you this. Let's say you've just made an absolutely kick-ass sales presentation to a financially qualified prospect who needs your product, wants your product, and who's also been feeling a bit of pain as a result of an unfulfilled need that your product perfectly meets. In addition, let's also say that your sales presentation was so on target that when you asked your prospect for the order, they were at a 10 on the certainty scale, and am sure of it. My question is, will the prospect buy from you? Yes or no? The obvious answer is yes, isn't it? Before you answer the question, I want you to know that I've laid out the same scenario to audiences all over the world and posed that very same question when I ask the people in the audience to raise their hands if they think a prospect will buy from them. Under those circumstances, every hand in the room goes flying up. It doesn't matter where I am in the world, how large the audience is, or how much sales experience they have, unless they've been taught the straight line system, their hands always go up, and that's when I deliver the punchline. I say, really? Well, guess what? You're all wrong. The correct answer is maybe. Maybe they will, and maybe they won't. You see, I was purposely being a bit coy with you before, and I left out one crucial point from that scenario I laid out. What if the prospect doesn't trust you? For instance, let's say that, during your sales presentation, you accidentally said something or did something that rubbed the prospect the wrong way, to the point where they no longer trusted you. What are the chances of them buying from you? Then, I'll tell you what they are. 0. Nothing. Zilch. Plain and simple, if your prospect doesn't trust you, then there's absolutely no way they are going to buy from you. And again, I don't care how certain they are about your product, they still won't buy from you. In fact, if they're that intent on purchasing your product, then they simply find someone else who sells the same thing, a salesperson they trust, and they will buy it from that salesperson instead. It's as simple as that. So, that's what makes up the second of the 3 10s. You, the 3 10s. 1. The product, idea, or concept. 2. You, trust and connect with you. 3. For example, do they think you're a likable, trustworthy person who is not only an expert in your field but also prides yourself on putting your customers' needs first and making sure that if any problems arise you'll be right there on the spot to resolve them? That would be a 10 on the certainty scale. Or do they think you're an unlikable snake in the grass, a stone-cold novice who'll stick the knife in their back the moment they turn it from you, because all you care about is extracting the maximum amount of commission out of the deal, and then moving on to the next target as quickly as possible? That would be a 1 on the certainty scale. And in between those two extremes you have all the varying degrees of certainty as you move up and down the scale. For example, maybe the prospect thinks you're reasonably trustworthy, but they just don't like you very much. Maybe you broke rapport with them as a result of something you said during your sales presentation, or perhaps it happened even earlier than that, at the moment the prospect first laid eyes on you. Maybe there was something about the way you looked, or the way you shook their hand, or how much eye contact you made that turned the prospect off and hence stopped you from falling into a deep state of rapport with them. Or maybe it was the way you asked questions when you were trying to gather intelligence to identify their needs and values and to see if they were financially qualified. Perhaps you came off as the grand inquisitor type, asking questions with a sort of laser-guided focus that makes people feel like you care more about maximizing your commission than resolving their pain. Whatever the case, my point is that, in the same way that you have varying degrees of certainty for how the prospect feels about your product, there are also varying degrees of certainty for how the prospect feels about you. In consequence, if you want your prospect to say yes when you ask for the order, then you're going to need to have them as close to a 10 as possible for both of those things, you and your product. Now let me ask you this. Let's say that you're able to get your prospect to a level very close to a 10 for both things. Will they buy from you then, yes or no? Hopefully, you've caught on by now and you've figured out that the answer will be the same as last time, which was maybe, as in, maybe they will and maybe they won't. You see, like last time, I left out one very crucial point from the scenario. Namely, what if your prospect doesn't trust the company you work for? For example, let's say your prospect read something very negative about your company, something that led them to believe that the company might not stand behind the product you're offering, or that they would get poor customer service if any problems arose. What are the chances of them buying from you under that circumstance? They're slim and nil, and slim, as they say, left town. It's really quite simple. If your prospect doesn't trust the company you work for, then there's absolutely no way they are going to buy from you so long as you continue to work there, or until you can convince them otherwise. And again, I don't care how certain they are about the first two tens, they will simply not buy from you if they think the company you work for will ultimately try to screw them. So that's what makes up the third of the three tens. The three tens. 1. The product, idea, or concept. 2. You trust and connect with you. 3. The prospect must trust and connect with the company. In fact, this is why it's so much easier to sell to existing customers than to new ones, even if you don't have a personal relationship with them. The fact that they have an existing relationship with your company means that the third 10 has already been established, leaving you with only the first and the second 10s to address. Now, if you work for a Fortune 500 company with an impeccable reputation, then the chances are extremely high that your prospect will walk into the sale already at a very high level of certainty for the third 10. That's plainly obvious, right? However, what's not quite as obvious is that in addition to having the third 10 established, there's also an extremely high likelihood that your prospect will walk into the sale feeling a very high level of certainty for the first and second 10s as well. In other words, before you even open your mouth, the prospect is also going to be inclined to trust you, because reputable companies choose their employees carefully and take the time to train them and the product you're offering, because reputable companies have too much to lose selling low-quality products. Conversely, if you're working for a company that has a questionable reputation, then your prospects are going to enter the sales encounter at far lower levels of certainty. In fact, depending on how bad that reputation is, you can find yourself fighting a serious uphill battle with your prospects, as many of them will be entering the sales encounter with a certainty level below 3. Lastly, if you're working for a small company whose reputation is neither good nor bad, but simply unknown, that will have little impact on where your prospect enters the encounter on the certainty scale, other than the usual skepticism that's created by dealing with a company that you've never heard of before. Whichever the case, the most important thing to remember is that your prospect will always enter the sales encounter at some point on the certainty scale. Just where? Who really knows? After all, we are not mind readers. However, what we do know is that your prospect will definitely be somewhere on the scale, because they haven't just arrived from outer space or crawled out from under a rock. Your prospect has been living right here on planet Earth, which means that they will have had at least some type of experience with the type of product you're selling and the industry you're in. For example, let's say you're a car salesman working in a Mercedes dealership. Even if your prospect has never driven or even sat in a Mercedes before, you wouldn't expect them to react like one of those shrieking chimpanzees in 2001, A Space Odyssey, and start jumping up and down on the hood as if trying to make sense of some completely foreign object. Get the picture? My point here is that no matter what product you're selling, whether your prospect walks in your door or answers your cold call or clicks on your website, they will always enter the encounter with a preconceived notion about you, about your product, and about the company you work for. You see, we all arrive at any particular moment in time with a history of beliefs and values and opinions and experiences and victories and defeats and insecurities and decision-making strategies, and then based on all of that stuff, our brain, working at near light speed, will instantly relate it to whatever scenario lies before it. Then, based on the result, it will place us at whatever point on the certainty scale it deems appropriate for each of the three 10s, and it's from that starting point that we can then be influenced. Now, if you think that sounds a bit complicated, have no fear. I promise you that it's not. In fact, once you become even reasonably proficient with the straight line system, you'll be able to take any prospect, regardless of where they started off on the certainty scale, and move them to higher and higher levels of certainty with remarkable ease. It will simply be a matter of taking immediate control of the sale, and then moving your prospect step by step down the straight line from the open to the close, and building massive certainty along the way. 2 types of certainty. Before we move forward, there's just one more thing about certainty that I need to fill you in on, namely, that there are actually 2 types of it. You have logical certainty, and you have emotional certainty, and they're entirely different things. Logical certainty. Logical certainty is based primarily on the words you say. For instance, does the case you've made to the prospect add up on an intellectual level? I'm talking about the actual facts and figures, the features and benefits, and the long-term value proposition as it relates specifically to that prospect. In other words, from a sober, emotionless perspective, does the idea or thesis that you presented to them make sense? Does your product or service truly fill their needs? Is it priced fairly when compared to the competition? Does the cost-benefit ratio make it an unequivocally great deal? When a prospect is feeling logically certain about your product, they can go from start to finish and connect all the dots in the logical case you've made without finding any holes in your story. As a result, they feel confident in their ability to tell the story to someone else and, if necessary, convince that person that they are 100% justified to feel the way they do. That, from a purely empirical perspective, The truth is on their side. That's what logical certainty is all about. Emotional certainty. On the flip side, emotional certainty is based on a gut feeling that something must be good. Once it hits us, we feel a craving inside that simply must be fulfilled, even if there's a heavy price to pay for fulfilling it. Unlike logical certainty, emotional certainty has to do with painting your prospect a picture of the future where they've bought your product and can see themselves using the product and feeling good as a result of it. We call this technique future pacing, and it serves as the very backbone of how we move someone emotionally. When you future pace someone, you're essentially playing out the post-buying movie in the best fashion possible, allowing that person to experience your product's amazing benefits right now, along with the positive feelings they create. The prospect's needs have been filled, their pain has been resolved, any itch that they had has been scratched, and they are feeling wonderful as a result of it. Now, if you're wondering which of the two kinds of certainty is more important, the answer is they're both important and they're both absolutely crucial if you want to close at the highest level. You see, people don't buy on logic, they buy on emotion, and then justify their decision with logic. The logical mind is analytical by nature, so the more information you give it, the more information it wants to know. In consequence, if you get your prospect to a high level of logical certainty, they'll say, "It sounds great, let me think about it, or let me do a bit more research, and I'll call you back." However, if you skip making the logical case and focus strictly on creating emotional certainty, it won't do the trick either, because the logical mind serves as a human bullshit detector. It stops us from being swept away by our emotions if things don't add up logically. In consequence, if you want to close at the highest level, then you're going to have to create both types of certainty, logical and emotional, which is precisely what you'll be doing as you move your prospect down the straight line, from the open to the close. More on this later, lots more. So let me sum things up for you one last time before we take the next step forward. Plain and simple, if you've been able to move your prospect to a very high level of certainty, both types of certainty, for each of the 3 tens, then you have an excellent shot of closing them. Conversely, if even one of the 3 tens has not been lined up, then you have no shot of closing them at all. However, to be clear, when I say no shot, I don't mean that the prospect will hit you with an outright no. In fact, when you're following the principles of the straight line system, you will almost never hear the word no, except at the very beginning of the sale, when you're first introducing yourself or when you're qualifying the prospect. At those points in the sale, you will hear the word no, and that's absolutely fine. In fact, it's an important aspect of the straight line system, as one of its cornerstone philosophies is that we do not make a full-blown sales presentation to someone who is not interested in buying what we're selling. Instead, we want to weed these people out as quickly as possible during the intelligence gathering phase. More on that later. Remember, it's not the job of salespeople to turn no's into yeses. It's simply not what they do. Instead, we turn "let me think about it" into a yes, and "let me call you back" into a yes, and "I need to speak to my wife" into a yes, and "it's a bad time of year" into a yes. In traditional sales parlance, we refer to these various statements as objections, and they come up mostly in the back end of the sale, after you've asked for the order for the first time. In reality, though, the actual meaning of any particular objection has very little to do with what it states on the surface. You see, at the end of the day, objections are merely smokescreens for uncertainty for one or all of the 3 tens. In other words, if you ask for the order and your prospect is not high enough on the certainty scale, then they'll throw out a smokescreen in the form of one of the common objections, as opposed to coming clean with you, which would mean revealing specifically which of the 3 tens was holding them back. Now, there are some exceptions to this, which I'll get to a bit later, but my point is that, more than 95% of the time, the common objections are merely ploys on the part of the prospect, who would rather bow out of the sale gracefully than have to look the salesperson in the eye and confront them about their lack of certainty concerning the 3 tens. For example, it's far less confrontational to say, "Let me think about it," or "It's a bad time of year" to someone who's just spent the last 10 minutes telling you how wonderful a product is, than to say, "I don't trust you," or "I think your product stinks," or "I don't like your company," or "I can't afford it right now," or "Your product seems kind of great, but I'm not 1000% sure of that, and I simply can't afford to risk being wrong and have my spouse chasing me around the house, screaming, 'I told you so, I told you so.'" So, to avoid the possibility of a head-on confrontation, the prospect conjures up a little white lie, a special lie, a lie that gives the salesperson just enough false hope to make them think that there is a shot of getting a callback by ending the encounter. Now, without pressing the prospect any further, to that end, the prospect will often start off their objection with a quick one-liner about how much they like your product. For example, the prospect might start with something like, "It sounds pretty good, Jim," or "It seems really interesting, Jim," and then follow it up with, "I just need to speak to my wife first. How about I give you a call back tomorrow?" And with that, the prospect has set themselves up to gracefully bow out of the sale, while the salesperson, if they were naive enough to buy into this charade, has not only eliminated any chance of closing the deal, but has also been set up for massive pain when they start dialing through the list of callbacks, which consists of people who had no intention of buying in the first place. Before we move on, I just want to dispel any notion you might have that straight line strategy for handling objections is going to promote, support, or even remotely recommend the use of high-pressure sales tactics in any way whatsoever. Simply put, it won't. See, what I was talking about before was something entirely different, namely, that it serves both the prospect and the salesperson to be honest and forthright with each other during a sales encounter, and that anything else is a complete waste of time. With a straight line system, we don't leave a crucial outcome like honest communication up to chance. We ensure it by making it the sole responsibility of the salesperson and then providing him or her with a bulletproof formula to achieve that outcome every time. So, with that, let's go back to that very Tuesday evening when the idea for the straight line system came bubbling into my brain. Coincidentally, it was the subject of handling objections that first got me thinking about a better way to train salespeople, and that led me to that groundbreaking statement that every sale is the same. At precisely 7 p.m., the meeting started. It was a meeting that would change the lives of millions of people all over the world, rich and poor alike, and create more top sales producers than every other sales training system combined. 2. I'm ready to go all night, I said to the Stratonites threateningly, and slowly I locked eyes with each and every one of them and let each feel the full weight of my stare. They were sitting behind old wooden desks, arranged classroom style, and on each desktop sat a cheap black telephone, a gray color computer monitor, and a stack of maybe 100 3x5 index cards that I purchased from Dun & Bradstreet for 22 cents apiece. Each of these cards had the name and phone number of a wealthy investor on it, along with the company they owned and its annual revenue for the prior year. To Danny and me, these DMBS, as they were called, were as valuable as gold, with every 200 cards yielding 10 qualified leads, from which we would open between 2 or 3 new accounts. And while those numbers might not sound overly impressive, any broker who did that for 3 straight months would be on pace to make over $2 million per year, and if he did it for a year, he'd be on pace to make more than triple that. Unfortunately, the Stratonites' results hadn't been quite as impressive. In fact, they'd been downright awful. For every 200 DMBS they dialed through, they were averaging only 5 leads, and from those 5 they were closing an average of ... no one. Ever. So you might as well get comfortable, I continued, because we are not going anywhere until we figure this out. So let's start by getting brutally honest. I want you guys to tell me why you're finding it so hard to close rich people, because I really don't get it. I shrugged. I'm doing it. Danny is doing it, and I know that you guys can do it too. I flashed them a hint of a sympathetic smile. It's like you have some sort of mental block against this, and it's time to break it down. So, let's start by you guys telling me why this is so hard for you. I really want to know. A few moments passed as I just stood there at the front of the room, looking holes through the Stratonites, who seemed to be literally shrinking in their seats under the weight of my stare. They were a motley crew, all right. There was no denying that. It was a miracle that any of these clowns had even passed their broker's exam. Finally, one of them broke the silence. There are too many objections, he whined. I'm getting hit with them left and right. I can't even get a pitch off. Me too, added another. There are thousands of objections. I can't get a pitch off either. It's a lot harder than with penny stocks. Exactly, added a third one. I'm getting smashed with objections. He let out a deep sigh. I vote for penny stocks too. Same here, added another. It's the objections, they don't let up. The rest of the Stratonites began nodding their heads in agreement as they muttered their collective feelings of disapproval under their breath. But I wasn't the least bit fazed, with the exception of that one reference about voting as if this were a fucking democracy. I'd heard it all before. In fact, since the day we made the switch, the brokers had been complaining about the increased number of objections and how difficult they were to overcome. And while there was some degree of truth to it, it wasn't nearly as difficult as they were making it out to be, not even close. There are thousands of objections? Give me a break. For a moment, I considered taking immediate action against the rabble-rousing Stratonite who'd mentioned the V word, but I decided against it. It was time to call these guys out on their bullshit, once and for all. Fair enough, I said, with a hint of sarcasm. Since you guys are so sure about these thousands of objections, I want to list every single one of them right now, and, with that, I turned to the whiteboard and grabbed a black magic marker off the ledge of the stand and raised it to the center of the board. Go ahead, I continued. Start calling them all out, and then I'll rattle off all the answers for you, one by one, so you can see how easy this is. Come on, let's go. The Stratonites began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. They looked utterly dumbfounded, like a family of deer caught in the headlights, but not nearly as cute. Come on, I pressed. Speak now or forever hold your peace. I want to think about it. One finally yelled. Good, I replied, and I wrote the objection on the whiteboard. He wants to think about it. That's a great start. Keep going. He wants you to call back, shouted another. Okay, I replied, writing that one down too. Wants a call back. What else? Send me some information? Okay, that's a good one, I remarked, jotting it down as well. Keep going. I'll make it easy and we'll shoot for 1,000. There's only 997 to go. I flashed them a sarcastic grin. It's totally doable. It's a bad time of year, someone yelled. Good, I shot back. Keep going. I need to speak to my wife, yelled another. Or his business partner, shouted yet another. Excellent, I said calmly, writing both objections down. We are making serious progress here. There are only 994 to go. Keep going. I'm not liquid right now, yelled a broker. Now, that's good one, I said quickly, scribbling it down on the board. Although, you have to admit that you're not getting that one quite as much since we started calling rich people. Anyway, let's keep going. There are only 993 to go. I only deal with my local broker, one of them yelled. I never heard of your firm before, shouted another. I've been burned before. I don't like the market right now. I'm too busy. I don't trust you. I don't make quick decisions. And on they went, calling out objection after objection as I wrote each one down in progressively worse handwriting. By the time they were done, I'd covered the entire surface of the board with every objection they could possibly think of, which, at the end of the day, turned out to be only 14. That's right, there were only 14 objections, and half of them were variations of two. First, that it was a bad time of year, as in it's tax time, summertime, back to school time, Christmas time, Miller time, Groundhog Day. And second, that they needed to speak to someone else, as in their spouse, their lawyer, their business partner, their accountant, their local broker, their local soothsayer, their local tooth fairy. What a bunch of crap, I thought. For the last 4 weeks, the Strattonites had been going on and on about how impossible it was to deal with these thousands of objections, to the point where, in my darkest hour, they had almost convinced me that they were right, that there were simply too many objections for the average salesperson to handle, and that the success that Danny and I were having was another example of the difference between natural-born closers and everyone else. Yet it had all been a bunch of crap. All at once, I felt my face growing hot. In retrospect, even before I had invented the straight line system, I always knew that there wasn't any real difference between one objection and another. But, somehow, seeing them all scribbled out on the whiteboard this way highlighted just how interchangeable they all really were. In fact, it was in that very moment that it truly hit me that, at the end of the day, they were all basically the same, that the common objections were nothing more than smokescreens for what was really holding a prospect back, which was a lack of certainty. In fact, now that I thought about it, no matter what objection the prospect hit me with, I would never just answer it and ask for the order again. That would be pointless, since the objection was merely a smokescreen for uncertainty by itself. In fact, all an answer would do, even a perfect one, is force a prospect to shift to a new objection, because the root problem still hadn't been addressed. In consequence, after I answered an objection, I would then loop back to the beginning of the sale and make a follow-up presentation that picked up where my initial presentation had left off, with the goal of increasing the prospect's state of certainty for all 3 tens. And once again, as with the rest of my strategies, I would execute each one of my loops in precisely the same exact way, every single time. It was at that very moment when it suddenly hit me, the idea that every sale was the same. In fact, all at once, that very concept came bubbling up into my brain, followed a millisecond later by an elegantly simple image that I could use to explain it. The image, as it turned out, was a perfectly straight line. But that was just the beginning. Something had clicked inside my brain, and a window of clarity had swung open, giving me unfettered access to a seemingly infinite reservoir of what can best be described as pure sales wisdom. I'm talking about radically advanced stuff here. Ideas and concepts and tactics and strategies were flashing through my mind at an incredible rate. In my mind's eye, I could see my own sales strategy being pulled apart into its elemental pieces and then put back together in exactly the right order, along a perfectly straight line. My heart literally skipped a beat. It happened so fast that it seemed almost instantaneous, but it hit me with the force of an atomic bomb. Until that very moment, I simply hadn't known why I had been able to far outsell every other salesperson at every single company I had ever worked for. But now I knew. My own sales strategy, which had been mostly unconscious until then, had subtly become conscious. I could see each distinct chunk of my strategy as if it had the defined edges of a jigsaw piece, and each individual piece seemed to be screaming out its purpose at me. But there was more, much more. When I shifted my focus to any particular piece, I suddenly had access to every root experience and every memory that justified the piece's purpose and location. And by focusing a bit deeper, a torrent of words came gushing into my consciousness, providing the perfect explanation for the piece and how it related to the others. For example, if I looked at the point on the line marked sales presentation, then I immediately knew that there were 3 things that had to be addressed before the prospect would say yes, and then, if I focused a bit harder, the word certainty popped into my mind, followed, a millisecond later, by each of the 3 tens, which seemed to be floating above the line and tethered to scenes going back all the way to my childhood, of random sales situations I had been in on either side, as salesperson or prospect, and a vivid memory of why I had said no or yes to the salespeople, or the prospects had said no or yes to me. All of those things, each compressed into a millisecond, had flashed through my brain while I stood before the whiteboard, staring at the objections, from end to end. The entire experience was maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but when I turned to face the Strattonites, I was an entirely different person. As I scanned their faces, the strengths and weaknesses of each came popping into my brain in a singular rush of thoughts, as did a perfect way to train each of them to perfection. In short, I would teach them to sell exactly the way I did, by taking immediate control of the sale, and then moving the prospect from the open to the close along the shortest distance between any 2 points, a straight line. With renewed confidence, I said, "Don't you guys get it? Every sale is the same?" All 12 Strattonites shot me confused looks. I ignored them with relish, and I unleashed my discovery. "Watch," I said forcefully. "It's a straight line." And I turned back to the whiteboard, and for the very first time, I drew that long, thin, horizontal line across the middle of it and placed a big, thick X on either end. "Now, this is your open." I pointed to the X on the left end of the line, where the sale begins, and this is your close. I pointed to the X on the right end of the line, where the prospect says, "Yeah, let's do it," and he opens up the account with you. The key here is that, from literally the first word out of your mouth, everything you say and everything you do is designed to keep your prospect on the straight line, and slowly nudge him forward, from the open to the close. You guys follow me so far? The Strattonites nodded in unison. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. The air felt electric. Good, I replied quickly. Now, as a salesperson, every once in a while, we get one of those perfect lay-down sales where the prospect seems to be almost pre-sold. Before we even open up our mouths, as I continued to speak, I began drawing tiny arrows on the center of the line, starting just after the left X and then moving down the line to just before the X on the right. It's one of those sales where everything you say and everything you do and every case you make about why the prospect should buy from you, he keeps on saying yes, 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 without giving you even a single objection, right up to the moment where you ask him for the order and he agrees to close. That's what I mean by a perfect straight line sale. Who's ever had one of those perfect lay-down sales where the client seemed to be almost pre-sold from the start? You all have, right? I raise my right hand, prompting them to do the same. All 12 hands quickly shot up. Of course you have, I said confidently. The problem is that those sales are far and few between. Typically, what happens is that your prospect keeps trying to take you off the straight line and take control of the conversation. I drew a series of thin arrows pointing upward and downward away from the straight line to illustrate that point. So, basically, you want to keep the prospect on the straight line, moving forward towards the close, and he keeps trying to take you off the straight line, and spiral off to Pluto. I wrote the word Pluto near the top of the whiteboard, or down here to Uranus. I wrote the word Uranus near the bottom of the whiteboard, which is not a very good place to be, at least for most of you. I threw my hands in the air and shrugged, as if to say, to each his own. So what we have are these healthy boundaries, above and below the line 1. Here and 1 here I continued, drawing 2 dotted lines that were parallel to the straight line, one of them 6 inches above it, and the other 6 inches below it. When you're inside the boundaries, you're in control of the sale, and moving forward towards the close. When you're outside the boundaries, the client is in control and you're spiraling off to Pluto, or down here to Uranus, where you're talking about the price of tea in China or politics in America or some other irrelevant topic that's not germane to the sale. And, by the way, I hear you guys doing this shit all the time when I walk around the room, and it drives me fucking crazy. I shook my head gravely. Seriously, 90% of the time you guys are often freaking Pluto, talking about some nonsense that has nothing to do with the stock market. I closed my eyes tightly and gave my head a few quick shakes back and forth, as if to say, some things just completely defy logic. Then I said, anyway, I know what you guys are thinking, that the more time you spend bullshitting with these people, the more rapport you end up building. Well, I've got a news flash for you, I continued sarcastically. You're wrong. People see through that shit in 2 seconds flat, especially rich people, who are constantly on guard for that. To them, it's actually repulsive, not attractive, which is the opposite of what building rapport is all about. I shrugged. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, because you guys are done with that shit now. It's over. I'm going to teach you guys how to take control of the sale tonight, the way I do it, and how I taught Danny to do it, and that means you're going to stay inside these boundaries, here and here. This is where you're in control. Boom, boom. I bang my right knuckle on 2 spots inside the boundaries, one above the line and one below, and I mark each spot with the initials IC. And here and here, this is where you're out of control, and I bang my right knuckle on 2 spots outside of the boundaries, one above the top dotted line and one below the bottom dotted line, and then I mark each space with the initials. OK. In control, out of control, I repeated, tapping the respective initials. Now, when you're on the straight line, meaning directly on it, that's where you're doing all the talking. And all these little arrows here, the reason they're all pointing down the line to the close, I began tapping the tip of my marker on each arrow as I continued speaking, starting with the very first arrow just after the open and moving quickly to the right all the way down to the close, is because with every single word you say there's one specific goal in mind, and that's to move the prospect down the straight line towards the close. That's it. There are no free words, no time for stupid statements, and no time to go off to Pluto and talk about the price of tea in China. That shit is for novices. My obvious contempt for novices dripped off the very word. When you're speaking, it's directed, it's powerful, your words have meaning behind them, and the meaning is to create massive certainty in the mind of your prospect as you move them down the straight line, from the open to the close. I pointed to the arrows again. That's why every one of these arrows is compact and tight and right on the line, and they're all pointed straight towards the close. So again, that's what's happening when you're directly on the straight line. You're the one doing all the talking, and your client is listening. And when you're off the straight line, but still inside the boundaries, right here and here I point to the spaces, it's the prospect who's doing the talking, and you're doing the listening. And by the way, this is where some really great stuff happens when you're actually off the straight line, right in those spaces. In fact, there's not one, but 2 absolutely crucial things happening here. First, you're developing immediate massive rapport on both a conscious and unconscious level, and second, you're gathering massive intelligence, which up until tonight I used to refer to as qualifying. But starting right now, I want you to wipe that word out of your mind forever, because it doesn't even come close to describing what we need to accomplish here. You see, with a straight line, you need to gather intelligence, and I mean massive intelligence, which goes far beyond trying to figure out whether or not a prospect is financially qualified. When you gather intelligence from a prospect, you're doing all of the following things. First, you're identifying their needs, and not just their core need, but also any secondary needs or problems they might have. Second, you're identifying any core beliefs they might have that could impact the sale, such as not feeling comfortable working over the phone or with making quick decisions, and also not trusting salespeople in general. Third, you want to find out about any past experiences they've had with similar products, both good and bad, and how they feel about the salespeople they bought them from. Fourth, you want to identify their values, meaning what things are most important to them. Are they looking for growth or income, or do they want to set themselves up for retirement, or to give their profits to a certain charity or a religious institution? It can even be that the prospect is an action junkie and they're in it for the thrills. Fifth, you want to identify their financial standards, insofar as what level of wealth and spending ability they need to have to feel good about themselves. Sixth, where their pain lies, meaning what's keeping them up at night. What's that one single financial worry that sits at the very base of their skull and weighs them down like an anchor? You see, at the end of the day, it's knowing your prospect's pain and, if necessary, amplifying that pain. If they're currently in denial, that's going to help you close the tougher sales. And seventh, you need to identify where they stand financially, in terms of how much money they have in the market right now, how liquid they are, how much money they typically invest into an idea they like, and how much they are liquid for overall. So, getting back to the straight line, when you're off the line, you're looking to A. Continue building on the rapport that you already have, and B. Use that rapport to help you gather the more invasive intelligence, like how liquid the prospect currently is. And at the same time, you're always making sure that the encounter stays within the boundaries as you continue the process of moving the sale down the straight line towards the close. Essentially, those are the three basic tenets of the front half of the straight line. 1. You must take immediate control of the sale. 2. You must engage in massive intelligence gathering, while you simultaneously build massive rapport with your prospect. 3. You must smoothly transition into a straight line presentation, so you can begin the process of building absolute certainty for each of the three tens. So, again, during the front half of the sale, you first take immediate control of the sale, then you use that control to gather massive intelligence, which entails asking highly specific questions, which I'll map out for you in advance to make sure that you've gathered all the intelligence you need, and I'm going to circle back to this later, because starting tomorrow, you're going to be asking a lot more questions than you used to. And next, as you're gathering all this intelligence, you're going to do it in a way that allows you to build massive rapport with your prospect at the same time, which is absolutely crucial, by the way, because the questions you'll be asking them are going to get more and more invasive as you move along. And then, after you ask for the order for the first time, which happens right around here, while you're still close to the beginning, I pointed to a spot on the line about a third of the way towards the close, and punctuated it by drawing a big, thick black dot. That's where the back half of the sale begins, when you get hit with your first objection. So, obviously, this whole front half, back half business is merely a figure of speech. I shrugged. I mean, I can teach a frickin' monkey to read from a script and ask for the order. So don't think that you've accomplished anything amazing because you made it through the front half of the sale. It's the back half of the sale where the real selling begins. This is when you finally get the chance to roll up your sleeves and get down to cases, meaning to get to the bottom of what's really holding your prospect back, which is certainly not the objection they gave you. That's merely a smoke screen for uncertainty. And the objection could be any one of these. I grab the top right edge of the whiteboard and flip the board over, revealing the 14 common objections. They want to think about it, or call you back, or talk to their wife, or do some research. It's a bad time of year. It doesn't matter which one they give you. In the end, they're all basically the same. They're smoke screens for uncertainty. In other words, your prospect still isn't certain enough to say yes, which means you've still got some selling left to do. I pause for a moment and flip the board back over to reveal my drawing of the straight line. That's what's going on, I repeated. Every word, every phrase, every question you ask, every tonality you use, every single one of them should have the same ultimate goal in mind, which is to increase the prospect's level of certainty as much as humanly possible, so that by the time you get to the close, he's feeling so incredibly certain that he almost has to say yes. That's your goal. In fact, think of this as goal-oriented communication. I continued, spitting out the phrase at literally the same instant it popped into my mind. Every word that comes out of your mouth is feeding into one single goal, which is to increase your prospect's level of certainty to the highest possible level as you're moving him down the straight line towards the close. Here, let me draw it out for you on the board. Imagine a continuum of certainty between 1 and 10, I said confidently. As I began turning back to the whiteboard, I saw one of the Stratonites' hands shoot up. It was Colton Green. Colton Green was an 18-year-old Irishman with a beefy skull, a budding drinker's nose, and an IQ just above the level of an idiot, a nincompoop among nincompoops, but a lovable nincompoop nonetheless. With a dead smile, Green? What's a continuum? He asked. The rest of the Stratonites chuckled at Colton's idiocy, which was rather ironic, I thought, considering that most of them were idiots too. But, as it turned out, the usual deterrents to success, such as idiocy and stupidity, were about to become completely irrelevant inside the four walls of Stratton's boardroom. You see, over those next few hours, I literally invented the straight line system. As I was teaching it to the Strattonites, the system effortlessly poured out of me, with each breakthrough paving the way for yet another breakthrough. I felt as if I were almost channeling the information from someplace else, a place of infinite knowledge and infinite wisdom, a place where the answers to all of my questions, no matter how complex, were ready and waiting, and there for the taking. So I took all that I could, with relish. By midnight, I had laid out the framework for the entire system, and had created the first straight line syntax, consisting of 8 distinct steps. The syntax served as A simple roadmap for taking a prospect down the straight line. It showed the Stratonites what to do first, what to do second, what to do third, all the way down to the eighth and final step, where the prospect either said yes and opened an account with you, or he stuck to whatever objection he'd been using as his smoke screen, and you ended the call respectfully and moved on to the next prospect. About a month later, I added on 2 additional steps as deeper layers of the system continued to pour out of me. Then, many years later, I increased the number to 14 when I created the 2.0 version of the straight line system and began teaching it around the world. Amazingly, though, the core of the syntax remains almost identical to what came out of me that first Tuesday evening, which makes perfect sense when you consider what happened the next morning when the Stratonites hit the phones armed with the straight line system for the very first time. In fact, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. From literally the moment they started dialing, the entire office went on an account opening spree of such biblical proportions that, within 90 days, every last one of them had become a $1 million producer. But that was only the beginning. As word of our success began to spread, brokers began showing up at my door, unannounced. By the end of 1989, there were more than 200 Stratonites working in one massive boardroom at Stratton's new corporate headquarters in Lake Success, Long Island. Twice a day, every day, I would stand before a rapidly expanding army of obscenely young Stratonites and pound them with a combination of straight line skills training and daily motivation. In essence, by radically enhancing their mindsets and skill sets, I was able to persuade each new Stratonite to leave the insults of the past behind and check their emotional baggage at the door, to accept the fact that the moment they stepped into the boardroom, everything in the past fell off. Day after day, I told them that their past did not equal their future unless they choose to live there. I told them that if they fully embraced the straight line system and simply picked up the phone and said the words I taught them, they could become as powerful as the most powerful CEO in America. And I told them to act as if. I said, act as if you're a wealthy man, rich already, and you will become rich. Act as if you have unmatched confidence, and you will become confident. Act as if you have all the answers, and the answers will come to you. I told them to act as if their success was a foregone conclusion, that it was time to accept the fact that they had true greatness inside them, greatness that had always been there, dying to come out, but it had been buried under countless layers of insults and bullshit that society had dumped on them in an effort to keep them down and make them settle for a life of mediocrity and averagism. And while all those thoughts were still fresh in their mind, I would set up my transition, focusing on the dire importance of skills training by getting brutally honest with them. I would say, maybe some of the stuff that people said about you was actually true. Maybe your parents and your teachers and your ex-boss and ex-girlfriend, maybe they were all right about you. Maybe you're not that special. Maybe you were born just an average guy, not all that smart, not very well-spoken, not overly motivated, and you slept through grade school, you cheated your way through high school, you didn't go to college, so maybe you've had the desire to achieve greatness, but you truly weren't capable of it. You lack the skills you needed to go out into the world and kick some ass. Now, be honest here, how many of you guys feel like that sometimes? Not always, but sometimes, like when you're lying in bed at night, alone with your thoughts, and the fears and the negativity come out and start whispering in your ear, eating away at your self-confidence and self-worth. Raise your hand if you feel like that sometimes. Like clockwork, every hand in the room would go flying up. Exactly, I continue. Most people feel that way, and they actually have every right to because they're not special. They don't have any special skill or talent or ability that sets them apart from everyone else. They have no edge, no advantage that they can use to separate themselves from the pack, nothing they can use to get rich. And, by the way, I hate to say it, but that includes pretty much every one of you in this room. Then I quickly add the punchline. Or at least it used to. See, I don't know if you guys actually get this, so let me make it crystal clear for you. You are not the same person who walked into this boardroom on your first day. In fact, you're not even close to being the same person. The straight line system has changed you. It's made you an infinitely more effective human being than you've ever been in your entire life, because you now own a skill that sets you apart from pretty much everyone else on the planet. You have the ability to close the deal, to influence and persuade at the highest possible level, to the point where you can close anyone who's closable. And since you didn't own the skill before, anything negative that happened to you in the past has absolutely no bearing on the future. Do you understand that? Do you see the power in that? Do you guys realize that every last one of you has turned yourself into a force of nature? Someone who can create any vision for the future they want and then go out and achieve it. The simple fact is that the ability to close the deal is the single most important distinction, bar none, when it comes to achieving wealth and success, and you guys literally own that skill at the highest level. And if you think I'm making this shit up or even exaggerating, then go ask any rich person and they'll tell you straight away that without the ability to close the deal, it is really hard to make money, and once you do have that ability, then everything becomes easy. In fact, that's why I can point to any person in this room who's been here for more than a few months, and he'll tell you some ridiculous success story that no one outside of this room would even believe, because the success is so extreme that they can't even wrap their arms around it. And on I would go, day in and day out, once in the morning, before the market opened, and then again in the afternoon, after it closed. I kept pounding the Stratonites with it twice daily. Combination of skills training and motivation, and with each passing day the success stories grew crazier and crazier. By the end of year one, top producers were earning over $250,000 a month, and Their success seemed to be almost contagious. Even par had climbed to $100,000 a month, and the attrition rate was basically zero. In other words, if you made it into the boardroom, then you were almost guaranteed to succeed. All you had to do was take a quick look around you in any direction, and there was massive success everywhere. For a new trainee, this was more than sufficient to quash any doubts about the power and effectiveness of the straight line system. In fact, after a few months of teaching it, I had devised a paint-by-number training curriculum that was so easy to follow that it was virtually foolproof. 5 core elements of the straight line system. At the heart of the system are 5 core elements. To this very day, they're exactly the same as the day I created them, and they serve as the backbone of the entire system. As you may have guessed, I've already touched on the first 3 elements, namely, the all-important 3 10s. 1. The prospect must love your product. 2. The prospect must trust and connect with you. 3. The prospect must trust and connect with your company. In essence, as you move your prospect down the straight line, everything you say should be specifically designed to increase your prospect's level of certainty for at least one of the 3 elements, with your ultimate goal being to move all 3 of them to as close to a 10 as possible, at which point you're going to ask for the order and hopefully close the deal. However, that being said, what you need to remember here is that this is not the type of process that happens all at once. In fact, in the vast majority of cases, you're going to have to ask for the order at least 2 or 3 times before you have any chance of your prospect saying yes. Now, when you finish the main body of your sales presentation, you've reached a point on the straight line where you are going to ask for the order for the first time and wait for a response, and then the back half of the sale begins, which gets triggered when the prospect hits you with the first objection. Alternatively, this is the point in the sale where you'll find out if you have a laydown on your hands, in which case the prospect will simply say yes, and you can close the deal without having to address any objections. But as I said before, these laydown sales are few and far between. Most of the time, prospects are going to hit you with at least 1 or 2 objections, although usually it's more like 3 or 4. In order to move forward, the prospect needs a high level of certainty. But either way, since these objections are actually smokescreens for uncertainty, the salesperson has to be prepared to not only answer them in a way that satisfies the prospect but also make a follow-up presentation that picks up right where the initial presentation left off, with the goal of increasing the prospect's level of certainty for the 3 10s even further, and with an ultimate goal of getting the prospect as close as possible to a 10 10 10 both logically and emotionally, which gives the salesperson the best possible chance of closing the deal. The straight line technique that we use to accomplish this is called looping. Looping is a simple yet highly effective objection handling strategy that allows a salesperson to take each individual objection and use it as an opportunity to further increase a prospect's level of certainty without breaking rapport, and then seamlessly transition into a close. In many ways, the art of looping is the so-called secret sauce to the straight line system, or at least to the back half of it, as it allows a salesperson to increase a prospect's level of certainty in small increments as opposed to all at once. In other words, each objection creates the opportunity to loop, and each loop results in a further increase to a prospect's level of certainty, and as each loop is completed, the prospects find themselves that much farther down the line, and that much closer to the close. While looping is a very simple process, there is one particular scenario that keeps coming up again and again, and unless a salesperson is prepared for it, it tends to drive them out the wall. For the most part, this scenario rears its ugly head after you've run 2 or 3 loops, and you raise your prospect's level of certainty to a point where they're so absolutely certain that you can actually hear it both in their tone of voice and the actual words they say. In short, the prospect has made it crystal clear to you through their words, their tonality, and, if you're in person, their body language, that they are absolutely certain about all of the 3 10s, yet, for some inexplicable reason, they are still not buying. There's actually a very logical reason for this, and it has to do with an invisible force that holds sway over every sales encounter, dictating how far down the line a salesperson has to take any particular prospect before they finally say yes, or put another way, at what collective level of certainty does any particular prospect need to be at before he or she says yes? You see, at the end of the day, not all prospects are created equal. There are some who are very tough to sell to, others who are very easy to sell to, and still others who are right in the middle, being neither tough nor easy. When you dig beneath the surface, it turns out that what separates all these potential buyers from one another is the sum of the individual beliefs they have about buying, about making decisions in general, and about trusting other people, especially those who are trying to sell them things. Together, the sum of all these beliefs, and all the experiences that have contributed to the formation of these beliefs, creates a defined threshold of certainty that a prospect must cross over before he or she feels comfortable enough to buy. We call this level of certainty a person's action threshold, and it comprises the 4th core element of the straight line system. By way of definition, we refer to people who are very easy to sell to as having a low action threshold, and we refer to people who are very difficult to sell to as having a high action threshold. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but what makes this concept so absolutely crucial to a salesperson's success is a remarkable discovery I made that proved to be the linchpin strategy that allowed people with very little natural sales ability to close at the same level as a natural-born salesperson, namely, that a prospect's action threshold is malleable. It is not set in stone. Practically speaking, the implications of this are staggering. After all, if you can lower a person's action threshold, then you can turn some of the toughest buyers into easy buyers, which is something that we do with great effect in the latter stages. of the sale, and that sets up the possibility of being able to close anyone who is closable. However, when you're out in the field, you're going to find some extraordinarily tough customers. I'm talking about prospects who still won't buy from you, even after you've raised their level of certainty as much as humanly possible, and then lowered their action threshold and ask for the order again. So, for these ultra-tough nuts to crack, we now turn to the fifth core element of the straight line system, the pain threshold. You see, at the end of the day, pain is the most powerful motivator of all, causing human beings to quickly move away from whatever they believe is the source of their pain, and to move towards whatever they believe will resolve their pain. In essence, pain creates urgency, which makes it the perfect vehicle for closing these tougher sales. To that end, it's absolutely crucial that you take the time to uncover precisely what your prospect's pain is and where it comes from. Once I have that information, I can then position my product as a remedy for their pain, and then verbally paint a picture for them of the future showing how much better they are going to feel as a result of using my product, which has taken away all their pain, and has them feeling pleasure again. In addition, by saving this powerful human motivator for last, it gives us the ability to make that one final push, taking a prospect who needs our product and wants our product and can truly benefit from our product, and creating just enough pain to push them across their action threshold and get them to buy. So, there you have it. The 5 core elements of the straight line system. 1. The prospect must love your product. 2. The prospect must trust and connect with you. 3. The prospect must trust and connect with your company. 4. Lower the action threshold. 5. Raise the pain threshold. Each of these core elements serves its own unique purpose, while paving the way for everything that comes after it. My favorite metaphor to explain this process is how a professional safecracker goes about plying his trade, like in the movie The Italian Job. If you haven't seen it, here's the skinny. Donald Sutherland plays one of those old-fashioned safecrackers who puts his ear to the tumbler and listens for each click. Upon hearing the first one, he spins the tumbler in the opposite direction and waits for the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one after that. Finally, when he's gotten a click for each number in the combination, he'll pull down the handle to try and open the safe, and voila. If he's identified each number correctly, the safe will open. In a manner of speaking, that's precisely what you're doing when you're moving a prospect down the straight line. Essentially, you're cracking the code to his or her buying combination, and you're doing it the same way every single time. And here's what we know about the safe of the human brain when it comes to making a buying decision. There are only 5 numbers in the combination, that's it. The first number is a prospect's level of certainty about your product. The second number is their level of certainty about you. The third number is their level of certainty about your company. The fourth number addresses their action threshold, and the fifth number addresses their pain threshold. That's all there is. 5 basic numbers to crack. Now, in terms of how we spin the tumbler, well, that's what the next 200 pages of this book are about. In that regard, I guess it's fair to say that this book is basically a universal safecracker's manual for the human mind. Will it crack every single buying combination? No, not everyone, and that's a good thing. After all, not everyone is closable, at least not on every occasion, and sometimes it turns out, due to ethical reasons, a prospect shouldn't be closed. That said, however, what the straight line system can do, once you become reasonably proficient at it, is get you to a point where you can close anyone who's closable. In other words, if someone doesn't buy from you, then you'll know that it wasn't because you did something wrong. You won't walk away from a sale saying to yourself, too bad JB wasn't here, he would have closed him. However, as powerful as the straight line system is, it completely breaks down in the absence of one crucial element, which is, you need to take immediate control of the sale. Without control, it's like you're an amateur boxer stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson. Within seconds, you'd be completely on the defensive, covering up from Tyson's massive blows until one finally slips through and you get knocked out. Yet, from Tyson's perspective, because he took immediate control of the encounter, from literally the moment the bell rang, he won the fight by knockout. Before it even started, same as he did in the last fight, and the fight before that, and the fight before that. Put another way, by taking immediate control of each fight, he was able to make every fight the same. Slowly but surely, he maneuvered his opponent into a corner, cutting off every possible escape. Then he softened him up with body blows and waited for him to drop his hands, and then bam, he'd land the exact knockout punch that he'd been planning all along. In the first straight line syntax, and in each syntax that followed, taking immediate control of the sale was the very first step in the system, and it always will be. Just how you go about doing that turned out to be elegantly simple, albeit with one complication. You have only 4 seconds to do it. Otherwise, you're toast. 3. The first 4 seconds. For better or worse, we have to accept the fact that, as human beings, we're basically fear-based creatures. We are constantly sizing up our surroundings and making snap decisions based on how we perceive them. Is it safe? Is there danger nearby? Do we need to be extra careful about something? This type of snap decision-making goes all the way back to our caveman days, and it's wired into our reptilian brains. When we saw something back then, we had to size it up instantly and decide whether to stay or run. It was only after we were sure that we were safe that we'd start debating whether or not it made sense to stick around for a potential benefit. That quick decision-making instinct is still with us today. The stakes are much lower, of course, because we don't typically face life or death situations every day. But still, the process happens just as quickly. In fact, it happens in less than 4 seconds over the phone, and in only a quarter of a second when you're in person. That's how fast the brain reacts. Think about that. It takes only a quarter of a second for a prospect to make an initial decision about you when you meet them in person. We know this because scientists have conducted experiments where they hook people up to a certain type of MRI machine that reveals how the brain works as it's processing information. Here's what happens when scientists flash a test subject a picture of someone. First, the subject's visual cortex lights up almost instantly, and then, a quarter of a second later, their prefrontal lobe lights up, which is where the judgment center of the brain is located, and a decision gets made. It happens that quickly. During a phone call with a prospect, you have a bit longer. You have 4 seconds to make an impression. To be clear, though, even when you're in person, it still takes 4 seconds before a final judgment gets made. The difference is that the process starts sooner when you're in person, literally from the first moment the prospect lays eyes on you. But either way, whether in person or over the phone, there are 3 things that you need to establish in those first 4 seconds of an encounter if you want to be perceived in just the right way. 1. Sharp as a tack. 2. Enthusiastic as hell. 3. An expert in your field. Those 3 things absolutely must come across in the first 4 seconds of a conversation, otherwise you set yourself up for a major uphill battle. Now, in truth, if you screw up the first 4 seconds, you have another 10 seconds at most to play catch-up ball, but after that, you're completely done. It's basically a lost cause. You can't influence anybody. At this point you might be asking yourself, what happened to not judging a book by its cover? What about that, Jordan? Well, my parents were actually big believers in that adage, and so were my school teachers. But you know what? They did it, and so do I, and so do you, for that matter. Each and every one of us judges books by their covers. It's basically hardwired into our brains, and it's not just an American thing. It's also an Australian thing, a Chinese thing, a Brazilian thing, an Italian thing. It's a human thing. It exists everywhere in the world, and crosses all cultural boundaries. The bottom line is that you have 4 seconds until someone rips you apart, compartmentalizes you, judges each piece, and then puts you back together again, based on how you were perceived. And if those 3 aforementioned things, being sharp as a tack, enthusiastic as hell, and an expert in your field, haven't been established firmly in your prospect's mind, then you have basically no chance of closing them. Now, why is that? Well, think about it for a second. Do you really want to do business with a novice? When you go buy a car or a stock or a computer, who do you want guiding you through the process, a novice or an expert? An expert, of course. In fact, we've been conditioned since we were yay big to seek out experts to help us solve our problems and eliminate our pain. When we were sick, our parents took us to a very special person called a doctor, who wore a white lab coat and had a stethoscope around their neck, and we were awestruck at first at how even our own parents deferred to this person until they told us why. This person, they explained, had been through countless years of schooling, during which they learned everything there was to know about making sick people feel better. These people were even taught how to dress and how to act and how to talk so people would have confidence in them at a single glance, which is why you started to feel better just by being in their presence. This person had earned the right to be called a doctor because they were a true expert in their field. But, of course, this was only the beginning of our conditioning. As we grew older, the parade of experts continued. If we were struggling in school, our parents might hire us a tutor. If we wanted to master a certain sport, they'd hire us a coach. And when we entered adulthood, we picked up right where our parents left off, and to this very day we continue to seek out experts and teach our children to do the same. Think about it for a moment. Who do you think Scarlett Johansson wants styling her hair on the day of the Oscars? Is she going to seek out some pimple-faced kid who's fresh out of beauty school, or is she going to track down the world's foremost stylist who's been making celebrities look fabulous for the last 20 years? And who do you think Jordan Spieth or Jason Day will turn to if they're in a slump? A local pro at a municipal course, or a world-famous swing doctor who's written books on the subject and who's worked with other famous professionals for at least 20 years? The simple fact is that we all want to deal with pros or experts, and we also want to deal with people who are sharp and on the ball, and who are enthusiastic about what they do. Experts have a certain way of talking that literally commands respect. They say things like, "Listen, Bill, you need to trust me on this. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I know exactly what you need." Novices, on the other hand, tend to speak in far less definite terms, and their limited grasp on the deeper nuances of their product and their particular industry becomes more and more apparent as they move a prospect farther down the straight line and enter the looping phase, and are forced to free-form, meaning they run out of scripted material and are forced to make things up on the fly in an effort to push their prospect's level of certainty above their action threshold so they'll buy. My point here is that how you are perceived will carry through to every part of the sale, but it starts in the first 4 seconds. If you screw that up and make a negative first impression, then you basically have no chance of closing the deal. Interestingly, the first time I said this was close to 30 years ago, on that very Tuesday evening when I invented the straight line system. I told the Strattonites that evening that they had precisely 4 seconds to make that all-important first impression. However, as it turns out, I was actually wrong. In 2013, a professor at Harvard University published a study on this exact topic, the importance of first impressions, and what the study found was that it wasn't 4 seconds until a prospect made the initial judgment. It was actually 5 seconds. So I have to apologize for being off by 1 second. Apologies aside, what the study also found was that if you make a negative first impression, it takes 8 subsequent positive impressions to erase that one negative first impression. Frankly, I don't know about you, but in all my years in sales and With all the products I've sold, I can't think of one industry where, if I screwed up the first meeting, I got 8 subsequent chances to redeem myself. It simply doesn't happen. That's why it is absolutely mandatory to establish those 3 crucial elements in the first 4 seconds of the conversation every single time. Otherwise, you're toast. 1. First, you're sharp as a tack. If they don't think that you're sharp as a tack, you're wasting their time. You must come across as someone who's totally on the ball, a born problem solver who is definitely worth listening to because you can help them achieve their goals. In essence, you have to sound and act like someone who can help the prospect fulfill their needs and desires. You can accomplish this by demonstrating mental speed and agility, fast decision-making, and a unique pace of delivery that immediately impresses the prospect and builds trust. However, to achieve lasting success, you must actually become an expert in your field so that you do, indeed, know what you're talking about. In other words, you can't just talk the talk, you also have to walk the walk. So while you're busy acting as if you're working at lightning speed to learn everything there is to know about your industry and the products you're selling, so you truly do become an expert. 2. Second, you're enthusiastic as hell. This sends a subliminal message to your prospect, telling them that you must have something great to offer. You must sound upbeat, enthusiastic, and full of energy, and be a positive influence in their lives. One of the things that I had to learn the hard way was that just because you can sell someone something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. Today, I have a strong belief in sales as an honorable profession, and I'll only operate in sales situations where I have an unyielding and passionate belief in the value of the product or service I'm offering to prospects. I need to genuinely believe in that value before I sell a product or service, and then I'll describe it passionately. I also have to have a firm belief in the company that the product and I represent. This is what allows me to act enthusiastically in any sales situation. 3. Third, you're an expert in your field, an authority figure and a force to be reckoned with. From the time they're old enough to walk, people are taught to respect and listen to authority figures. In sales situations, I convince the prospect that I am a highly competent, ultra-knowledgeable professional by coming off as a world-class expert in my field right out of the gate. Not only does this allow me to instantly gain the prospect's respect, but it also causes them to defer to me and basically hand over control of the sale. To demonstrate this authority, I translate features of the service or product into benefits and value for the prospect while using technical industry lingo that I've taken the time to simplify, allowing the prospect to easily grasp what appear to be very complex statements. I'll also add value by offering a unique perspective during the sales conversation, demonstrating extensive knowledge and understanding of the market, industry, product, prospect, and competitors. Remember, the biggest misconception among new salespeople is that they feel like they have to wait a certain amount of time until they can brand themselves as an expert. That's a load of crap. You need to be acting as if from the very start, while you educate yourself as fast as possible to close the knowledge gap. Show them you're worth listening to. When you immediately establish these 3 things, they roll up into one simple fact in the prospect's mind, namely that you're a person worth listening to. In other words, it makes sense for them to take time out of their busy day because someone who's as sharp as you and enthusiastic as you, and who's achieved your level of expertise, is going to 1. Get to the point quickly. 2. Not waste the prospect's time. 3. Have a solution to their problem. 4. Be an asset to them over the long term. In addition, once the prospect has come to this positive conclusion about you, their brain will instantly extrapolate your value to its logical end, which is, you can help them achieve their goals. You can help get them what they want in life. It could be a core need they're looking to fulfill, it could be a simple want or desire, it could be to gain control over a certain aspect of their life, or, at the highest level, it could be to alleviate a pain they're feeling. And, again, because the human brain is so naturally adept at this, it takes less than 4 short seconds for your prospect to rip you apart, analyze each piece of you, and then put you back together based on how you were perceived. If you're perceived the right way, that you're sharp as a tack, enthusiastic as hell, and an expert in your field, then the prospect will defer to you and let you take control of the sale. If you're perceived the wrong way, that you're as dull as dishwater, a disinterested bore, and a stone-cold novice, then the opposite happens, and the prospect takes control. It's nothing less than a make-or-break situation. Now, that being said, one thing that I want to make crystal clear to you is that I am not advocating that you become one of those talking head types, the kind who go on and on while their prospect just sits there and listens. While that might be what pops into your mind when I say, take control of the sale, I assure you that this is not what I'm talking about. I mean, think about it for a second. Don't you utterly despise being on the receiving end of a salesperson who goes on and on without ever letting you speak? It makes me want to run out the door. That's why the straight line system is as much about becoming an expert listener as an expert talker. However, to truly become an expert listener, you first need to learn how to take immediate control of the sale. There's simply no other way. The million-dollar question is how? 4. Tonality and body language. So let's get down to brass tacks. How do you convince your prospects that you're sharp as a tack, enthusiastic as hell, and an expert in your field in the first 4 seconds of a conversation? In fact, let me take it one step further. Since a substantial portion of communication takes place over the phone, nowadays, how do you ensure that you're being perceived the right way when your prospects can't even see you? Is it through the words you say? Think about that for a moment. What could you say to try to get all that across? In those first 4 seconds, you'd have to be literally yelling at your prospect, "Hey, Bill, listen to me. I'm sharp as a tack. I'm enthusiastic. I'm an expert in my field. I swear, and blah, blah, blah. You'd sound like a freaking idiot. Not to mention that, even if it all were true, no one would believe you anyway. The simple fact is that the right words just don't exist. There is no combination of words that are profound enough and stealthy enough to sneak past the logic center of your prospect's mind and create an emotional reaction that goes straight to their gut, for it's there, in your prospect's gut, where first impressions get formed in fractions of a second, and they'll guide their decisions until you prove them wrong. So if your words won't do it, then where do you turn? The answer is simple: your tone of voice. Specifically, how you say what you say has a profound impact on how it's perceived and, for that matter, how you are perceived, and not just during those all-important first 4 seconds, but throughout the entire conversation as well. You see, after millions of years of evolution, the human ear has become so adept at recognizing tonal shifts that even the slightest one can have a dramatic impact on the meaning of a word or phrase. For example, when I was a kid and I did something wrong, my mom would say Jordan in a stern, no-nonsense voice, and, without her having to say another word, I immediately knew that I was in serious trouble. Conversely, if she said Jordan in a sing-song tone, then I immediately knew that things were fine. On the flip side, if a sales encounter takes place in person, then a second communication modality comes into play, working hand in hand with tonality to help us get our point across. We call the second modality body language, serving as the dual linchpins of an immensely powerful communication strategy. Known as unconscious communication, tonality and body language play major roles in how we get our point across both while we're talking and as we are listening. In essence, your tone of voice, how you move your body, the facial expressions you make, the type of smile you offer, the way you make eye contact, and all those little friendly grunts and groans you make while you're listening to someone talk. The oohs and ahs and ahas and yups are an integral part of human communication and have a massive impact on how you're perceived. In terms of percentages, tonality and body language comprise approximately 90% of our overall communication, split evenly down the middle, with each modality having approximately a 45% impact, depending on which study you buy into, and there are more of them than you can count. The remaining 10% of communication is comprised of our words, meaning the actual words we say as we verbally communicate. That's right, only 10%. Now, I know what you're probably thinking right now. You're thinking that 10% sounds like way too low a number to measure the importance of words, especially in a situation when someone is trying to sell you something. In fact, if you were to think back to a time when you were being sold to, then I'm sure you would recall hanging on the salesperson's every word and judging each one based on its meaning. It was as if your logical mind was almost being hypervigilant as it went about deciding what level of logical certainty was most appropriate based on the logical case the salesperson had created with his words. Human communication. Tonality 45% plus. Body language 45% equals 90%. Words 10%. So I do understand how difficult it can be to buy into the concept that our words aren't that important. But here's the irony. You've actually misinterpreted the meaning of my words. You see, despite comprising only 10% of our communication, words aren't just important. They're actually the single most important element of our communication strategy. But, and this is a very big but, only when we finally open up our mouths to speak. In other words, 90% of the time, we're communicating without actually speaking. Yet still, when I walk into any phone room or I observe a sales force in the field, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 salespeople who are blessed with perfect tonality and flawless body language, the rest of them will be completely missing the boat. In consequence, they don't get perceived as having even close to the level of expertise that would prompt a prospect to hand over control of the sale and let themselves be guided. And just like that, through a process of unwitting self-sabotage, the sale has been poisoned from the very start, making it only a matter of time until it spirals out of control. Yet what's even more ironic than that is the fact that of all the tactics and strategies that comprise the straight line system, tonality and body language are some of the easiest to master. In total, of the 29 tonalities that a human being uses to communicate, only 10 of them are core influencing tonalities, meaning that we use them over and over again as we go about influencing and persuading. Likewise, the straight line system has been able to consolidate the infinite number of gestures and postures and facial expressions that comprise our body language into 10 core principles. Now, for those of you who are currently saying to yourselves, aha, I knew there had to be a catch. Jordan made everything sound so easy, and now I find out that I have to learn 20 different things? How am I supposed to do that? I'm not a kid anymore, I'm an adult, and an adult can't just learn 10 new tonalities and 10 new body language principles. It's totally preposterous. Hopefully, that's at least a slight exaggeration of what you're thinking right now. But either way, if you're feeling even remotely like that, then I have 2 very important thoughts I'd like to share with you. First, and I mean this in a kind of uncular way, cut the crap. It's time for you to get out of your own way and start living the life you deserve. You are capable of becoming proficient at anything you put your mind to. All you need is an easy-to-learn step-by-step strategy to show you the way, which is exactly what the straight line system is. In fact, one of the true beauties of the straight line is that even after just a little bit of training, when you're still at a very low level of competency, you'll still get surprisingly good results. Just how good depends on a number of variables: the industry you're in, the length of its sales cycle, how much time you dedicate to learning the system, and, of course, your skill level at the start. But most salespeople get at least a 50% pop in their sales over the short term, and you'll get double that if you're a complete novice who's in an industry with a very short sales cycle and lots of million-dollar producers. In straight line parlance, we call this the good enough factor, meaning that You'll still get very good results even when you're first getting started and you've only achieved a reasonable level of proficiency. And second, regardless of what you were thinking about having to learn all these new distinctions, the reality is that you don't have to actually learn anything. After all, implausible as it might seem, you already know everything you need to know. In fact, not only do you already know all 10 tonalities and all 10 body language principles, but you've also used them countless times throughout your life. The only difference is that, in the past, you have been using them automatically or unconsciously without even thinking about it. In other words, there have been countless times in your life when each one of these tonalities came out of you naturally, as a reaction to what you were actually feeling at the moment, and the same thing is true when it comes to body language. Let me give you an example. Have you ever had a time in your life when you were feeling so absolutely certain about something that the tonality of certainty just came flying straight out of your mouth? It was like you could literally feel the certainty coming through in every single word, and anyone who was listening would have had absolutely no doubt that you 100% believed what you were talking about. Of course you have. We all have. And how about telling a secret? How many times in your life have you lowered your voice to just above a whisper to tell someone a secret? Again, we've all done this 1,000 times, because we intuitively know that a whisper intrigues people and draws them in, compelling them to listen more closely. Now, in a sales setting, when you apply a whisper at precisely the right moment during a presentation, you will be shocked at the impact it has on your prospect, especially if you raise your voice back up right afterwards. The key here is modulation. You want to lower your voice, and then raise your voice. You want to speed up, and then slow down. You want to make a declarative statement, and then turn it into a question. You want to group certain words together, and then say others in staccato-like beats. For instance, let's go back to the whisper, but we'll add a little oomph to it. Now, we have what's called a power whisper, which comes from deep in your gut. Give your solar plexus a few quick pats with the palm of your right hand. That's the spot I'm referring to when I talk about your gut. A whisper from there creates the perception that what you're saying has extra importance to it, that you really mean it. It's like you're saying to the prospect, listen, pal, this particular point is really important, and it's something I really, really believe in, so you need to pay very close attention to it. But of course, you're not actually saying those words. They're registering with the prospect unconsciously, in the form of a gut feeling, which moves them on an emotional level, as opposed to a logical one. You see my point? Another great example of this is how we use enthusiasm to create massive emotional certainty in our prospect, meaning they get an overwhelming sense that whatever product we are selling simply must be good. To be clear, though, what I'm not talking about is that crazy brand of over-the-top enthusiasm, where you're yelling and screaming and flailing your arms about as you go on and on about how amazing your product is. Not only is that completely ridiculous, but it's also the easiest way to get your client running towards the exit. I'm talking about something called bottled enthusiasm, which sits just below the surface and literally bubbles over as you speak. It's about enunciating your words with absolute clarity and stressing your consonants so that your words have intensity to them. It's like you're talking with your fists clenched, and there's an active volcano inside you ready to erupt at any second, but of course it doesn't, because you're an expert who's in total control. That sort of bottled enthusiasm makes a massive impact on someone emotionally, and it's one of the earmarks of sounding like an expert. Just always remember to never stay in any one tonality for too long, or else the prospect will become bored, or in scientific terms, habituate, and ultimately tune out. To that end, I am constantly using my tonality and body language to ensure against that. You see, tuning out does not happen randomly. It's based on a conscious equation the prospect is running as to whether or not you're a person worth listening to. Prospects ask themselves, can this person help me achieve my goals? Can this person help me get what I want in life? Can this person help me resolve the pain I have? If the answer to those questions is no, then they tune out. If the answer is yes, they listen. It's as simple as that. That's why it's so absolutely crucial, right out of the gate, to come off as being sharp as a tack, enthusiastic as hell, and an expert in your field. If you do, then not only will you keep your prospect hanging on your every word, but they'll also let you take control of the sale and begin the process of moving them down the straight line. Now, in terms of how to start using this in the real world, you'll find that with just a little bit of practice, you'll be applying the right tonality and body language unconsciously, meaning automatically whenever you find yourself in a situation of influence. But until then, you need to be extra vigilant about consciously applying the right tonality and body language to every word and every turn of phrase. This will ensure that your prospect stays firmly in your magnetic zone and doesn't tune out. Before we move on to the next chapter, I want to go through some key nuances regarding the relationship between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, specifically how they work hand in hand with one another to guide all your prospects' decisions, especially during those crucial opening seconds when your ability to bypass their conscious mind and speak directly to their unconscious mind will dictate whether you succeed or fail at taking control of the sale. And then again, at the end of the sale, when your ability to speak to both minds at once will allow you to push past the action threshold of even the toughest prospects and achieve the highest level of straight line competency, which means that you can close anyone who's closable. So, that being said, let me start by dispelling one of the greatest myths regarding the relationship between the two minds, which is that the conscious mind is the more powerful of the two. Nothing could be further from the truth. Some 200 million times more powerful than its conscious counterpart, your unconscious mind, with its blazing speed and near infinite storage capacity, is what keeps you alive as you move through the world, working around the clock. It controls your entire autonomic nervous system, regulating your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your respiration, your digestion, your hormone secretions, and every other system in your body that seems to hum along effortlessly without you having to think about it. Broadly speaking, the primary goal of your unconscious mind is to keep things the same, or in scientific terms, maintain a state of homeostasis. Your weight, your body temperature, your blood sugar level, the amount of oxygen in your blood, the amount of light hitting your retinas, each of these things and countless others like them are constantly being adjusted to maintain a certain set point that a million years of evolution has deemed to be optimal. Conversely, your conscious mind is literally starving for processing power as it tries to make sense of things while you move through the world. In consequence, at any given moment, it can only focus on 3 or 4% of the surrounding environment, and it deletes the rest, allowing it to focus 100% of its relatively meager processing power on a few key items that it deems most important. Collectively, these key items represent conscious awareness, and the way you analyze them is through logic and reason. For example, at this very moment, 95% of your conscious mind is dedicated to your primary focus, which is reading the words I've written and listening to your own inner monologue as it debates what you've just read. The remainder is dedicated to your secondary focus, which consists of a handful of things that are happening close enough to you to be picked up by one of your 5 senses, and are either too extreme or too intermittent for your conscious mind to become desensitized to them and block them out. A blaring TV in the background, a noxious odor, the banging and clanging from a nearby construction site, someone snoring, your own breathing if you have a stuffy nose. Meanwhile, the 96 or 97% of the world that the conscious mind is deleting is being captured in its entirety by the unconscious mind. You see, not only is it responsible for regulating all your bodily functions, it also acts as the central depository for all your memories. In essence, everything you've seen or heard has been neatly filed away there, no matter how insignificant it may have seemed at the time or whether you remember it now or not. Your unconscious mind recorded the experience, compared and contrasted it with similar past experiences, and then used the results to refine and augment your internal map of the world, as the phrase goes, which serves as your internal barometer for formulating snap decisions, instant judgments, and first impressions. Your internal model of how you perceive your environment, how you believe it should operate, and how you believe you should operate within it, which types of behaviors lie inside your comfort zone and which ones don't. Then, to help you navigate the map and to ensure that your snap decisions, instant judgments, and first impressions remain consistent with the beliefs in your map, your unconscious mind also creates patterns of behavior, allowing you to instantly respond to situations that have been previously mapped out in a way that's fluid and elegant, consistent with your beliefs about yourself and the world, and that requires no conscious thought whatsoever. In essence, this 3-step process of generalization, map making, and the creation of patterns is what allows you to move through an unfamiliar environment without having to treat everything you see as if it were the first time you've seen it. For example, when you walk up to a strange door, you don't have to pause and examine each one of its features and wonder if it's safe to turn the little round knob that's sticking out on one side, despite never having seen this particular door before. Your unconscious mind has been through this scenario countless times, so it springs into action the instant the door comes into your field of vision, working at near light speed to match this particular door to the spot on your map marked doors and the various strategies for safely entering and exiting them in non-combat situations and where no new construction is taking place. Now, obviously I'm taking a bit of poetic license here, but my point is spot on. Rather than having to stop at every new door or every fresh crack in the sidewalk or countless other occurrences so your conscious mind can logic things out, your unconscious mind takes immediate action and saves your conscious mind the trouble. In fact, from your conscious mind's perspective, these snap judgments and instant decisions are based on gut feelings, and it will act in accordance with them until they are proven wrong. This happens frequently in sales, and when it does happen, it's almost always the result of something foolish or off base that the salesman said. In other words, while your prospect's first impression of you was a result of your unconscious communication, it can be completely destroyed by a few choice words, and that makes perfect sense, considering that words are the building blocks for airtight logical cases, which then serve as the basis for our conscious decisions. However, when it comes to airtight emotional cases, we rely far more heavily on unconscious communication in the form of tonality and body language than on the words others say. When the sales encounter is over the phone, we'll use our 10 core tonalities to move our prospect emotionally, while the words they're attached to will move the prospect logically, and when the encounter is in person, we'll also use body language to move our prospect emotionally, while our words will continue to move them logically. So, at the end of the day, whether it's in person or over the phone, the strategies you employ and the outcomes you desire will always be the same. You'll use words to influence your prospect's conscious mind, and tonality and body language to influence their unconscious mind, and the outcome of the former will be an airtight logical case, and the outcome of the latter will be airtight emotional case. All you need to know is precisely what words to say and when to say them, and what unconscious communication to apply and when to apply it. It's as simple and straightforward as that. Insofar as what words you're going to use to accomplish this task, I'm going to be handing them to you on a silver platter in Chapter 11, in the form of a foolproof scriptwriting formula that you can apply to any business or industry with massive success. However, as foolproof as this formula is, your success is still going to be contingent on your ability to trigger a key emotional state within yourself as you're about to enter the sales encounter, and then maintain that state to the very end. We refer to this process as state management, and it's one of the most important Elements in achieving success. In the following chapter, I'm going to take you for a trip down memory lane, back to the early days of Stratton, to show you the true power of state management when it comes to sales, and then provide you with a paint-by-number strategy for managing your own state that is not only wildly effective but also extremely easy to use. 5. State management. Before things at Stratton had spiraled out of control, the boardroom had been a truly remarkable place. It was an egalitarian society in the purest sense of the phrase, a meritocracy where you were judged solely on your performance, not by the weight of your diploma or your family connections. Once you entered the boardroom, it no longer mattered who you were, where you came from, or what mistakes you'd made in the past. All of that could be left behind. In essence, the straight line system served as the great equalizer, allowing even the most disempowered men and women to completely reinvent themselves and start their lives anew. To give you an idea of just how massive an impact the straight line system had on these kids, I would only be slightly exaggerating if I said that more than half of them showed up at my door with only a borderline ability to walk and chew gum at the same time. Then, 60 days later, I'd see the same kid and bam, that kid would be completely transformed. No matter how many times I witnessed it, this radical transformation was never lost on me. Everything from how they walked to how they talked to how they dressed to how they shook hands to the way they made eye contact, you could literally feel the confidence oozing off them. Now, for those of you who are currently saying to yourself, I don't see what the big deal is. I mean, if you paid me $50,000 a month when I was in my 20s, I would have changed anything you wanted me to. I'd have walked differently, I'd have talked differently, I'd have dressed differently, and I'd even have washed behind my ears if that's what it took. I mean, who wouldn't, right? If you were thinking anything along those lines, I can't say that I really fault you. After all, your argument is both intelligent and well thought out, and shows a very solid grasp on human nature. Unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact you're completely barking up the wrong tree. You see, the Stratton training program was 6 months long, so at the time I witnessed their transformation, none of the kids had started making any money yet. They were all still trainees, which meant they were still flat broke. So what was it then? What caused this transformation? In truth, there was more than one thing behind it, but at the heart of the transformation was a powerful visualization technique that I taught the Strattonites, called future pacing. In short, future pacing entails running an imaginary movie through your mind, where you get to see yourself in the future having already achieved a certain outcome. The result is that you get to experience the positive feelings associated with a future achievement right now, as opposed to having to wait until a few years from now, when you actually achieve it. During my daily sales meetings, I always made it a point to remind the trainees of the importance of future pacing their own success, and I also made them run the positive movie right there in their seats, allowing them to see themselves in the future already being rich and living the life. And, of course, in the same way that I told the first 12 Strattonites to act as if, I kept repeating that message to the boardroom again and again and again. I would say, act as if you're a wealthy man, rich already, and you will become rich. Act as if you have unmatched confidence, and people will have confidence in you. Act as if you have all the answers, and the answers will come to you. In other words, I told them that they should not only think like wealthy people, but to also carry themselves that way, because it leads to the right state of mind. As previously mentioned, the technical term for this is state management. In essence, when you're managing your emotional state, you're temporarily blocking out any troubling thoughts or emotions that might normally make you feel negative, thereby allowing yourself to maintain a positive state of mind. What makes state management so important in achieving success is that your current emotional state determines whether or not you'll be able to access your internal resources at that moment to achieve your outcome. When you're in an empowered state like certainty, for instance, then you're able to access your internal resources, which then sets you up for massive success. Conversely, when you're in a disempowered state, you're blocked from accessing your internal resources, and you've set yourself up for massive failure. It's very similar to how a valve works. An empowered state is the equivalent of the valve to your internal resources being fully open, allowing you to access them at will, while a disempowered state is the equivalent of the valve being closed, blocking you from accessing your resources, no matter how badly you might need them. Let me give you an example. Imagine that you have some of the best sales skills in the world. You're an expert at every aspect of the straight line system, from taking immediate control of the sale to running world-class looping patterns and closing the deal. But let's say you walk through your prospect's door in a state of absolute uncertainty, then how good of a salesperson can you be at that moment? Not very good, right? You see, at that particular moment, you're blocked from accessing your internal resources, in this case, your sales skills, so no matter how great of a salesperson you could be, you're simply unable to access that greatness. The same thing goes with your personal life. Let's say you're a parent. Now, obviously, you love your kids to death, and you pride yourself on being an amazing parent. In fact, you've even read a few books on parenting to give you strategy and insight, so you really know what you're doing. But let's say you come home after a really tough day at work, and you walk in the door in a state of anger and impatience, two very disempowering states. Then how good of a parent can you be at that moment? Again, not very good. Your anger and impatience have blocked you from accessing your resources for parenting. So, despite the fact that you still love your kids just as much as usual, and despite the fact that you still possess all those wonderful skills for being an amazing parent, at that particular moment you're blocked from accessing them. Here's the bottom line. As a salesperson, or as any success-oriented person, you must learn how to start triggering the key empowered states, otherwise you set yourself up for a lifetime of pain. There are no two ways about it. However, one point I want to clarify here is that what I am not saying is that you need to, or for that matter should even want to, live in empowered states all the time. That's completely nuts. Just think that through for a second. I mean, what do you call someone who walks around all day long with their chest puffed out in a state of absolute certainty? You call him an asshole, right? We hate those people. And you don't want to be one? I don't want to belabor the point, but this is a far bigger problem in the self-development world than you think, especially with people who attend seminars that focus solely on inner game skills. The problem that arises is that when you teach those skills without the context of a real-world application, the attendees almost invariably get the wrong message. The key distinction here is that once you've learned the technique for triggering an empowered state, I'm going to teach you the most powerful one in the world in a moment. You only want to use it at certain key moments when it matters most, like before you enter a sales encounter, or try to close a business deal, or enter into a negotiation, or even if it's just an important decision you need to make in your personal life. In fact, in the latter case, you definitely want to make sure that you're in an empowered state, because human beings, as a species, make their worst personal decisions when they're in a disempowered state, and their best decisions when they're in an empowered state. In terms of achieving success in sales, there are 4 key states that you need to learn how to trigger at will within state management. We call them the 4 Cs: certainty, clarity, confidence, and courage. These are your linchpin states for achieving wealth and success. If you don't learn how to trigger them, then you're playing Russian roulette with your future, essentially hoping that you'll be in the right state when you enter a sales encounter, versus knowing you will be because you have a surefire strategy to do it. The name of that strategy is olfactory anchoring. I created olfactory anchoring almost a decade ago in response to my personal need to instantly trigger an empowered state under what were becoming increasingly odd circumstances. As the story goes, when I was on my first global speaking tour, I began to find myself in situations where it was crucial for me to be in an empowered state despite the fact that the surrounding environment was often working heavily against me. For example, I was constantly getting cornered into doing last-second TV interviews, talk shows, radio shows, newspaper interviews, sponsor requests, and photo opportunities, all of which require that I look my best, act my best, and, in fact, be my best at all times, no matter how tired, jet-lagged, or completely burned out I was from being on a multi-year speaking tour. I was expected to perform plain and simple. In addition, on those very same days, I would also have to get up on stage and give anywhere from a 2 to a 10-hour talk to as many as 12,000 people who would pay good money to see me. So the moment I hit that stage, I had to take my state from 0 to 100 miles per hour in a matter of seconds. That was the reality I was facing. At the time, I had just started using a state management technique called NLP anchoring, which was part of a group of techniques and strategies that make up a body of knowledge known as neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP for short. Operating on the fringe of mainstream psychology, NLP's basic premise is that the human brain functions similarly to a computer and hence can be programmed as such to make near-instant changes to certain key behavioral patterns. The only sticking point, however, is that before you can make any changes, you need to know 2 important things. First, how to write code for the human brain. What type of software to embed the code in. It sounds complicated, I know, but in reality it's the exact opposite. Let me explain, and you'll see exactly what I mean. According to NLP, the software of the brain is language, and the way you write code is by creating language patterns, which consist of a group of words as brief as a short sentence or as long as a few paragraphs that have been structured in accordance with a series of basic yet extremely powerful linguistic principles that can be used to reprogram virtually any person's brain, including your own, in a number of very profound ways. One of those ways forms the basis of NLP anchoring. The basic premise of NLP anchoring is that human beings have the ability to choose how they feel at a particular moment in time, as opposed to it being chosen for them by what's going on in their surrounding environment or their personal life. In other words, we can be proactive when it comes to choosing our emotional state, as opposed to reactive, which is what most human beings have been conditioned to think is our only choice. A vast majority of human beings believe that their current emotional state is a result of outside forces that are being exerted on them. For example, if positive things are happening to you, then you'll end up falling into a positive emotional state, and if negative things are happening to you, then you'll end up in a negative emotional state. Now, obviously, the proactive nature of NLP state philosophy is attractive to anyone in sales, and for that matter anyone who wants to live a more empowered life. To that end, NLP has distilled the entire state management process into 2 core elements, both of which are under a person's conscious control. The first of these 2 elements is what you choose to focus on. In essence, at any particular moment, you have the ability to choose the precise direction of your focus, and based on that choice, you'll fall into a state that's congruent with what you've chosen to focus on. For example, if you spend the next few minutes focusing on everything that's great in your life, a recent business success, being in a loving relationship, the health of your children, a recent goal you achieved, a family getaway, then you will quickly pop into a positive, empowered state that reflects all those wonderful things. Conversely, if you spend the same amount of time focusing on everything that's wrong in your life, a recent business failure, a divorce, a sick child, a recent goal you failed to achieve, then you'll quickly fall into a disempowered state that reflects all those crappy things. It's as simple as that. The second of these 2 elements is your current physiology, comprised of the sum of all the possible ways that you can move and hold your body, your posture, your facial expressions, how you move your appendages, your Rate of breathing, your overall level of motion physiology of human beings as it relates to each emotional state is nearly identical across all cultures. In other words, human beings, as a species, will all adapt virtually the same physiology when they're in a happy, positive emotional state. Put another way, people who were born and raised in Papua New Guinea don't smile when they're depressed or frown when they're happy any more than Eskimos do, or people who were raised in Portugal do. For example, if I pointed to a closed door and said to you, behind that door is a very happy woman, for a prize of $10,000, I want you to tell me which of each pair of these physical traits best describes her. Is she smiling or is she frowning? Is her head held high or is her head slumped over? Is she breathing fully and deeply, or is her breathing slow and shallow? Are her shoulders pulled back, or are they rolled slightly forward? Is she standing up straight, or is she slightly hunched over? Are her eyes open wide, or are they slightly narrowed? And, of course, the same questions would apply if it were a depressed woman. Now, just so you know, I've asked both of those versions to live audiences all over the world: the US, the UK, Australia, South Africa, China, Russia, Singapore, Malaysia, Mexico, Canada, Iceland, Germany, and pretty much anywhere else you can think of, and no matter where I've been in the world, the entire audience always answers these questions in the same exact way. In other words, we know what a depressed person looks like, and we know what a happy person looks like, and we also know what an angry person looks like and what a loving person looks like too, and we all know what an impatient person looks like, and we know what a calm person looks like. It's all very logical. Now, let me ask you another state management question, albeit from a slightly different angle. Let's say you were in a depressed state right now, and I offered you $50,000 to act happy for the next 60 seconds. Could you do it? Yes, of course you could. It would be as simple as consciously making certain obvious changes to your physiology, ones that you would use countless times in your life since you were a little boy or girl. However, what if I offered you $100,000, no, make that $1 million, and asked you to make the same changes to your physiology as last time, albeit with one important difference? This time, I need you to maintain a happy physiology for the next 18 hours straight. Could you do it? No way. No matter how hard you tried, you simply couldn't pull it off. It's impossible. To be clear, this has nothing to do with you being weak or strong or anything of the sort. It's simply the way human beings are built as a species. You see, while it's true that we can, in fact, make ourselves feel any way we want, at any given moment, that moment is fleeting, giving us a window of opportunity. That's anywhere from 5 minutes to maybe an hour at most. After that, you'll slowly start to settle back to whatever state you were in before. Now, if any of this stuff still seems foreign to you, here's a quick exercise that will really clear things up. Ready? Okay, I want you to think back to all the times in your life when someone asked you to manage your state, and you actually did, but you called it something else at the time. For instance, how many times has someone said to you, keep your chin up, or put on a brave face, or look alert, or keep cool, or smile and act polite, or don't lose your temper? See my point? The reality is that we've all tried to manage our state at various times in our life, and sometimes we were successful and sometimes not. The goal of anchoring is to eliminate the not. So, with that, let's get specific. NLP's first leap of logic was based on the idea that human beings could proactively manage their emotional state with near 100% success by directing their focus and their physiology in a specific way. The second leap of logic was to combine this concept with classic Pavlovian conditioning, as in Pavlov's dogs. Remember Pavlov's dogs? As the story goes, sometime around the turn of the last century, a little-known Russian scientist named Ivan Pavlov conducted an experiment involving a starving dog, very common at the time, a juicy piece of meat, almost impossible to find at the time, and an extremely loud bell, very common, one would think, although, who really knows? Either way, the experiment's protocol was simple. Present the starving dog with the juicy piece of meat, while simultaneously ringing a bell. This he did. Not surprisingly, the dog instantly began to salivate at the sight of the meat, while the sound of the bell was merely coincidental to him, at least at first. However, what Pavlov quickly noticed was that as he kept repeating this process over and over again, it didn't take long until the dog would start to salivate just from the sound of the bell. The sight of the meat was no longer necessary. The reason for this, Pavlov concluded, was that each time he repeated the experiment, the dog's brain would develop a stronger link between the sound of the bell and the sight of the meat, until, finally, the link had grown so strong that the mere act of ringing the bell would be powerful enough to trigger salivation. In NLP, the ringing sound of the bell is referred to as an anchor, the act of ringing the bell is referred to as firing off an anchor, and the process by which two formerly unrelated items become linked together in this way is referred to as setting an anchor. The most common state that salespeople will try to set an anchor for is a state of absolute certainty, and the most common anchor they'll choose to try to link it to is a combination of shouting the word yes and simultaneously clapping their hands. Now, if you're thinking that screaming the word yes while executing a single clap of your hands doesn't seem quite as intense as tempting a starving dog with a piece of juicy beef while ringing a bell that's loud enough to wake the dead, then you're in the same boat that I was, feeling frustrated, skeptical, but still hopeful for an answer. Yet, on the flip side, I knew that the science behind NLP's approach was sound, and that the payoff for cracking the code would be incalculable, not so much to me, but to the tens of millions of people who would be attending my live events over the next few years. You see, unlike most people, I was blessed with a natural ability to manage my stayed at an extremely high level, so anchoring was really more of a luxury to me than a necessity. Unfortunately, though, for every oddball out there like me, there are 10 million normal folks whose natural abilities in this area lie on the opposite end of the spectrum. In consequence, I continued to experiment with a number of different strategies that could be combined with basic NLP anchoring in order to ratchet up its effectiveness. It took just a bit over a month until I finally struck gold. In the summer of 2009, I gave birth to a wildly effective state management technique that I proudly named olfactory anchoring. She was born weighing just over an ounce and was just under 2 inches long. She was on the thin side, for sure, but perfectly symmetrical nonetheless. However, out of all her defining features, there was one in particular that stood out above the rest. She stunk. 6. A surefire formula for managing your state. For the record, I consider my discovery of olfactory anchoring to be one of those fortunate situations where I was able to stand on the shoulders of a genius. The genius to whom I'm referring is Dr. Richard Bandler, the brilliant and wildly enigmatic scientist, visionary, entertainer, and hypnotist extraordinaire who invented NLP in conjunction with linguistics professor John Grinder. Focusing on inner world distinctions such as belief systems, value hierarchies, and state management, NLP took the self-development world by storm in the early 80s and has played a central role in fueling the industry's growth ever since. The reason I began studying it was a desire to learn 2 specific strategies that NLP was particularly well known for at the time. The first strategy was a timeline regression, which was designed to help people crack the code of their limiting beliefs and replace them with empowering beliefs, and the second strategy was anchoring, which, as discussed in the previous chapter, was designed to help people trigger a peak emotional state at will. In the end, while I had tremendous success at implementing the former, but the latter, as I explained, had come up seriously short, so it was that, in the summer of 2009, I began testing various ways to enhance anchoring's effectiveness. In early 2010, I struck gold. In retrospect, I'm still not sure why it took me so long to crack the code for anchoring. After all, the difference between NLP anchoring and olfactory anchoring is only 2 strategies I added, each of which addresses one of the 2 crucial aspects of anchoring that Bandler considered especially vulnerable to being poorly executed. The first vulnerability had to do with how intense you were able to get your state to at the precise moment when you introduce the anchor. The key, Bandler explained, is that you have to be at the absolute tippy top of the state in terms of the emotional intensity you feel inside in order to successfully set an anchor. Anything less than that, and the anchor won't set. In terms of how this would relate to the certainty scale from chapter 1, you'd have to be at an absolute unequivocal 10, with no ifs, ands, or buts. Only then, at that precise moment, when you felt the certainty literally bubbling up inside you, like a seething volcano, could you introduce an anchor and truly set it. So that's the first aspect of NLP anchoring that tends to trip people up, the difficulty of trying to artificially get yourself into a state of absolute certainty or, for that matter, absolute anything, as opposed to being there organically. The second vulnerability had to do with the type of anchor you choose, the equivalent of the bell in Pavlov's experiment. As Bandler explained, not only does the anchor need to hit you all at once, but it also needs to stand out in a dramatic way. A common everyday sound or gesture simply won't cut it. It needs to be extreme. The more extreme the better, in fact. And the more unusual the better too. In essence, you want to use something that's going to hit your brain in an unforgettable way and literally shock your senses. That's what a great anchor does, and it's absolutely crucial that you have one. But don't waste any of your time trying to find one. A little over 7 years ago, I stumbled upon the world's greatest anchor, and I'm going to be handing it to you on a silver platter in this very chapter. Now, in terms of the best way to teach you olfactory anchoring, what I've found over the years is that the secret is to take you through NLP anchoring first. This provides you with the perfect context for truly mastering olfactory anchoring, which, by the way, is so easy to master that not only will you be able to do it in one sitting, but a 7-year-old could do it as well. So, with that, let's get to it. There are 5 basic steps to NLP anchoring. Step number 1. Choose a state. This is where you set an intention for the emotional state you want to anchor. This will always be a conscious decision based on the circumstances that you're about to face, not what you're currently facing. In other words, anchoring is a forward-looking process that's proactive in nature. For the purpose of this exercise, let's choose a state of absolute certainty, as this is the state that you must be in when you enter any sales encounter. Step number 2. Choose your focus. This is where you close your eyes and go back to a moment in your life when you were feeling absolutely, positively certain. A perfect example of this would be the moment after you just closed a really tough sale as a result of sounding totally awesome. For whatever reason, you were at your very best that day, and now, as you bask in the sales afterglow, you have that super confident feeling, that feeling of absolute certainty where you know you can take on the world and close anyone who's closable. Once you've located that memory, I want you to create a vivid picture of it in your mind's eye. I want you to take in the whole scene so you can see all the players who were there, looking just the way they looked, including how they were dressed, how their hair was styled, and even how the room looked. Creating an internal picture like this, where you're looking down at yourself from above, involves being in what is called a disassociated state, and it's a crucial aspect of goal setting and self-motivation inasmuch as it allows you to see yourself completing a certain goal or task or an even more complete vision for your future. However, for the purposes of setting an anchor, there's an even more powerful way to use this internal picture, which I'll get to in a few moments, in step 4. Step number 3. Choose your physiology. This is where you're going to change your physiology to match the exact physiology of the state that you're trying to anchor. For example, in this case, you're going to make sure that you're standing certain and holding your head certain and walking certain and talking certain and even breathing certain, so that literally every aspect of your body, including your most minute gestures and facial expressions, is resonating with the emotion of absolute certainty. If you think it'll help, you can even take the picture from step 2 and actually put it in motion, so you're now seeing yourself in a movie, and you can use that as your model as you adopt the physiology of absolute certainty. Remember, being shy or bashful with your physiology is not going to serve you. At this point, quite simply, this is one of those cases where more is more, not less is more, and that goes for your focus too, as you're about to see right now, in step 4. Step number 4, intensify your state. This step involves using your 5 sensory modalities, also known as your 5 senses, to take the picture you've created in your mind's eye in step 2 and use your brain to manipulate it in a way that intensifies the feeling of absolute certainty that it creates inside of you. First, let me take you through the 5 sensory modalities, which are visual. This is what you see, both externally, in the real world, and internally, in your mind's eye. In the latter case, the picture can be from a memory, or it can be something that you've created yourself using your imagination, or it can be a combination of the two. Auditory. This is what you hear, both externally and internally, and with the same permutations as above. Kinesthetic. This is what you feel, both externally and internally, and with the same permutations as above. Gustatory. This is what you taste, both externally and internally, and with the same permutations as above. Olfactory. This is what you smell, both externally and internally, and with the same permutations as above. Now, for the most part, we tend to rely on the first 3 modalities to make sense of the world, with our visual modality being the most dominant, followed by our auditory and kinesthetic modalities, respectively. But, of course, when you're dealing with the brain, nothing is set in stone. For example, if you're a chef, then you'll rely heavily on your gustatory modality, and if you're a wine taster or perfumer, then you'll rely heavily on your olfactory modality. As I explained above, the way to use these modalities in anchoring is to take the picture in your mind's eye and alter it so it becomes more powerful to you emotionally. For example, if you focus on the image right now in your mind's eye, you can instruct your brain to make the picture bigger and brighter and sharper, and you can even move it closer to you, and doing that will tend to amplify whatever feeling the picture gives you, which in this particular case is a feeling of absolute certainty. However, as it is in real life, there's only so far that a still picture can take you, which is why the feelings that we get from watching a movie or a TV show are far more intense than the feelings we get from looking through a stack of pictures or from flipping through a magazine. In fact, the evolution of the motion picture business serves as a perfect metaphor for the relationship between the size and the quality of the images we see and the emotions that we feel as a result of them. For example, the industry started with silent movies shot in black and white, which were replaced by talking pictures shot in black and white, which were replaced by movies shot in color, which were replaced by movies shot in Technicolor and stereo, which were replaced by movies shot in widescreen and Technicolor with stereo and Dolby sound reduction, all the way to IMAX theaters with 3D and surround sound and so forth. Notice the obvious trend towards making things bigger and brighter and clearer and more realistic until they hit a certain point, and the trend began to reverse itself with things like super tall IMAX screens, 3D, and the shaking seats of surround never really catching on, despite their providing a more lifelike experience. You see, this is exactly how we use the 5 sensory modalities to intensify our state of certainty by taking the image you've created in your mind's eye and putting it through the same evolutionary process as the motion picture industry. I'll guide you through it right now, putting your brain to work. I want you to start by taking the still picture you created in your mind's eye and putting it into motion so you can actually see yourself moving in the picture and being your best self as you go about closing this huge sale. If it helps, you can even put a frame around the picture and imagine that it's a flat screen TV. The point is that by turning a still picture into a motion picture, you'll start feeling more connected to the scene and your state of certainty will start to intensify, especially when we execute our next step, which is to add on dialogue from your memory. So, do that right now, add on the appropriate dialogue as best as you can. Remember, and give yourself that same perfect tonality and body language. Or, if the dialogue you recall doesn't suit you, you can create new dialogue choosing words that will empower you and help you trigger the exact state you want. Now it's time to make your movie bigger and brighter and clearer and move it closer to you, and even add on 3D or any other change, but remember, each change should make the movie seem more real to you, and hence, increase your level of certainty. So if you reach a point of diminishing returns with any of your changes, like when you are forced to sit in the front row of a theater or when you turn up the brightness on your TV too much, or the volume is too loud, slowly reverse the change until you hit the exact sweet spot with each aspect of the movie. As you're making these various edits to this internal movie, notice how the feelings associated with this memory continue to intensify, and then you can intensify those feelings even further by imagining them occupying a certain part of your body, like just over your heart or your solar plexus, and then placing the palm of your hand over that spot and noticing how the feeling tends to spin or tumble in a certain direction. Then allow your hand to move with that feeling until they merge into one entity. You can use your hand to spin the feeling even faster, and you can even infuse your favorite color into the feeling, or have little explosions of fireworks shooting out if it ... And with that, let's pause for a moment. I have a quick question for you. Are you thinking that I've lost my mind a bit? I mean, feelings that tumble and spin and have colors and fireworks shooting out of them? There's no denying that it sounds a little bit wacky, don't you think? In fact, I'm the first one to admit it. But here's the thing. Do you think I would really waste your time and mine going through all this when I have more than enough other things to write more directly about than just the straight line system, which I invented? All these little adjustments you make using the power of your mind will, in fact, intensify your state even further, which is crucial because you can only set an anchor when you're at the absolute pinnacle of a state. This strategy alone won't get you there, but it sets you up for olfactory anchoring in a very big way. Step number 5, set your anchor. Now we're at step 5, which is where you actually set your anchor. What this entails is taking the intense state that you've just created and linking it to a word or mantra or to some external sound or sharp feeling, like clapping your hands and screaming the word yes, which was when the entire process had begun to break down for me. It started with my struggle to find a sound or a word or a movement that felt extreme enough and unique enough to serve as an anchor that I could fire in any situation. For whatever reason, nothing felt right, nothing felt profound until, one day, it did. Just how I came up with the idea to use sense of smell I don't fully recall, although it definitely had something to do with my memories from childhood. You see, as an adult, it never ceased to amaze me how even the slightest whiff of something that I had smelled during my childhood, a freshly cut grass field in the Catskill Mountains during summer camp, low tide at the jetty where my dad took me fishing, or the musky mothball scent of my grandma's house was enough to send the most powerful memories rushing back to the point where they viscerally hit me. Once I hit upon the idea of using the sense of smell to set an anchor, it didn't take long to find the perfect product. There were 2 requirements. 1, it had to be a scent that was extreme enough, unusual enough, powerful enough, and pungent enough to meet Bandler's criteria, yet still be pleasing enough to the nose to not gross me out or become its own negative anchor. 2, it had to have an unobtrusive delivery system that was portable, practical, and personal to me, meaning I could easily slip it into my pocket, remove it without fanfare, and then use it to fire off my anchor without the scent escaping into my surroundings and impacting the people around me. The name of the product I found was Boom Boom. See what this is at www.boomboomenergy.com. Boom Boom came in a sleek black tube about the size of a chapstick, so all I had to do was unscrew the top, give myself a blast up each nostril, and, just like that, I popped into my ideal state. It was an amazing breakthrough for sure, although the breakthrough it paved the way for was considerably more amazing, and what truly turned olfactory anchoring into the foolproof state management strategy that it is today. So what was this second breakthrough? Well, simply put, I figured out a laughably simple way to eliminate steps 2, 3, and 4 from NLP's 5-step anchoring process, leaving behind a leaner, meaner, and infinitely more user-friendly 2-step process that I officially dubbed olfactory anchoring because of the odorous centerpiece on which its foundation was built, namely Boom Boom. To explain exactly how I did it, let me go back a step. After I became a master practitioner in NLP, I spent the next 6 months trying to set an anchor for myself for a state of certainty. But no matter how many times I tried, when I got to step 4, which was using the 5 modalities to intensify my focus, things began to break down. The problem started with the memory I chose to focus on. I figured, what moment in my life had I ever been more absolutely certain than on that magical Tuesday evening when I first drew the straight line on my trusty whiteboard? I'm talking about the moment I described in detail in chapter 2, where my window of clarity opened. I couldn't think of a time when I felt more absolutely certain about anything. But, to my own shock, when I tried to set an anchor, it didn't take. No anchor was set. So I tried again and again and again. Nothing. No result. So I tried focusing on different memories, older memories, newer memories, recent memories, memories where I was selling, memories where I was training salespeople, memories when I was speaking on stage, but no matter how powerful the memories were, and no matter how many times I tried to use the 5 sensory modalities to get to the absolute pinnacle of the state, in my heart of hearts I knew I hadn't gotten there. The necessity of having to be at the absolute peak of a state in order to successfully set an anchor makes this strategy extraordinarily tough to execute. Whether you have someone guiding you through the process or not, to actually manufacture an artificial state of absolute certainty, I mean, to truly do this with no bullshit or exaggeration, is a major long shot, and most importantly, it's also prone to massive self-delusion, where people try to talk themselves into having succeeded because they desperately want the benefit. In fact, when it comes to setting an anchor with NLP, I've seen more of that well-meaning self-delusion than anything, especially at live events where people feel compelled to go along with the crowd, so they jump up and down and cheer and clap their hands and scream the word yes like wild banshees, and then high-five each other over the successful anchor they've just set. The stark reality, however, is that the numerous benefits they're getting from being in an elevated state, they'll learn faster, they'll remember more, they'll have an experience that they'll never forget, and that they'll buy tickets for again, are only temporary. So where am I going with all this? Well, in the end, what I eventually came to realize was that the only surefire way for me to be truly at that ultra-intense level of absolute certainty that's required to set a legitimate anchor was to wait until I was actually in that state organically and set my anchor then. In other words, why try to manufacture an ultra-peak state of absolute certainty through a series of powerful yet entirely subjective NLP techniques and never really know if I ever got there? All I had to do was wait until I closed a really big sale in the real world, which caused me to pop me into a peak state of absolute certainty organically, and then, right then, and I mean right then, in that very instant when I was basking in the afterglow of closing an awesome sale, and I knew in every cell of my body that I truly was in an organic state of absolute certainty, as opposed to an artificially manufactured imitation. I would bring out my boom boom and take a giant whiff up each nostril, boom, boom, and just like that, I'd have set myself one powerful anchor. So to sum it all up, with zero preparation, beyond simply choosing what state you want to anchor, all you have to do is wait for that awesome moment when you close a really big sale, or any situation that causes you to organically pop into a state of absolute certainty, or absolute anything, for that matter, and then, right then, in that very instant, when that moment hits, you whip out your tube of boom boom, unscrew the cap, take a deep prodigious blast up each nostril, so you can literally feel the rush of the mint and citrus bathing your olfactory nerves, giving you that pleasant, invigorating burn, then ball your hands into a pair of fists and start squeezing tightly, with your fingernails digging into your palms so you can really feel it, and belt out the word yes in a forceful yet controlled manner, so the bulk of the volume and power is directed inward, right to your solar plexus, where it resonates with your heart and soul and liver and loins and your very gizzard itself. And that's it. You just set yourself an extremely powerful anchor that you can use the next time you're about to enter a sales encounter. Here's how it looks, laid out in steps. Step number 1. Choose a state. Like before, let's choose a state of absolute certainty. Step number 2. Set your anchor. You wait for a very specific moment, and then take out your boom boom, unscrew the top, and follow the steps above. Take a massive blast up each nostril and then ball your hands up into fists and dig your fingernails into your palms, and belt out the word yes in a powerful yet controlled manner. Then, 10 seconds later, with the scent of boom boom still lingering, but the initial rush gone, repeat the process again. And that, as they say, is that you've anchored in a state of absolute certainty. Now, just to be safe, you can repeat this process one more time the next time you close the same type of awesome sale and stack a second anchor right on top of the first one. It certainly can't hurt, as anchors become stronger when they're stacked, but either way, even if you only set the anchor once, it should be very powerful the first time you fire it off, which should be right before you're about to enter a sales encounter. And just to make sure your anchor stays firmly locked in for the next month or so, whenever you close one of those especially awesome sales, the ones that cause you to pop into a peak state of absolute certainty, take another one and one of your boom boom, and keep stacking anchor on top of anchor on top of anchor, until the linkage is so ingrained that it will stay with you forever. So that's olfactory anchoring in a nutshell. I've seen it work its magic with countless people who have been impacted by this in a far more profound way than I. After all, state management was always something that came easy to me in a sales or business setting, but I'm the exception to the rule. For every guy like me, there are a million others who are the exact opposite, and they are held back massively for no other reason than that they lack the ability to show up to a sales encounter being their best self. To that end, I can't even begin to tell you how gratifying it's been to be able to throw those people a lifeline in the form of a little black tube with a wickedly pungent smell. All it takes is a quick shot up the left nostril and a quick shot up the right, and managing your state becomes as simple as taking a few drops of the scene to get the red out. In fact, between the awesome power of the straight line system and the assurance olfactory anchoring gives you that you'll be in a state that allows you to tap into that power, you set yourself up to accomplish virtually anything you put your mind to. So now let's shift back to the actual skills of the straight line system, picking up right where we left off with a deep dive into the 10 core influencing tonalities and body language principles. 7. Advanced tonality. Let's pick up right where we left off in Chapter 4, starting with a detailed explanation of each of the 10 core tonalities that drive human influence. However, before I dive in, I first need to give you a quick ethical warning regarding the extremely powerful unconscious communication strategy for which these 10 tonalities serve as the primary building blocks. When I say extremely powerful, what I mean is that once you become even reasonably proficient with this strategy, you can actually get people to buy things they shouldn't buy and do things they shouldn't do without them even realizing that an extraordinary amount of influence was brought to bear. Now, obviously, a strategy like that has the potential to be seriously abused by an unscrupulous salesperson, so I want to make sure that it's crystal clear to every last reader that I don't condone that sort of behavior in even the slightest way. Hence, I would greatly appreciate you signing the following ethical warning. I will never use the strategy I'm about to learn to manipulate my prospects into acting against their own self-interest. If I do, then I deserve the same 10 years of pain and suffering that Jordan had to endure. X. Your name. Remember, maintaining your ethics and integrity is the gift that every man and woman gives to themselves. Whether it's a lack of sleepless nights, being a role model to your kids, enjoying a sense of well-being, or building an impeccable reputation that creates even greater success, I can tell you from my own personal experience that there's no better feeling than achieving wealth and success without cutting any corners. So, that being said, let's dive in. What I've been leading up to here is the existence of an immensely powerful strategy that uses the 10 core influencing tonalities to enhance your outgoing communication in a way that's so profound that your prospect's conscious mind finds itself struggling to keep up with all the additional words it's hearing as a result of the constant shifts in tonality. In a matter of seconds, virtually all of its processing power is now dedicated to this one specific task, trying to keep up with the avalanche of additional words it keeps hearing, and you've taken control of your prospect's own inner monologue and have it narrating for you versus against you. Are you slightly confused? If you are, you're not alone. You see, while this strategy is very easy to learn, it's somewhat harder to Understand. So let me break it down for you step by step, starting with a quick refresher from the previous chapter regarding my mother's strategic use of tonality. When she called my name, if she said Jordan, in a stern no-nonsense tone, then the additional words I heard were, "Get over here right now, what have you done?" And conversely, if she said Jordan, in a sing-song tone, then the additional words I heard were, "Where are you, my love? Come out wherever you are." Now, this is just one basic example of how each individual tonality creates its own set of unspoken words that the listener hears in their conscious mind, and to which the listener then applies the appropriate meaning. To that end, when you're speaking to a prospect in a situation of influence, their brain is actually listening to two distinct things at once. First, they're listening to the words you say and analyzing the meaning of each one, both individually and in the context of the overall sentence, and second, they're listening to their own inner monologue as it debates the pros and cons of the last few words you said based on the meaning they apply to them. For example, let's say you cold call a prospect named John Smith, and he picks up the phone and says hello, to which you reply, "Hi, my name is Bill Peterson, calling from the Acme Travel Company. I'm looking for Mr. John Smith. Is he home?" Now, unless John Smith has been living under a rock for the last 30 years, there's a 99.9% chance that he will strongly suspect that Bill Peterson is a salesman. Precisely what product he's selling and where he got John's number from, John still doesn't know, but that doesn't change the fact that this person is a complete stranger as opposed to someone John knows. After all, a friend, or even a casual acquaintance, would never address him in such a formal manner, and such a person would likely also have recognized his voice over the phone. And when he combines that with the fact that virtually every time his phone rings, he turns out to be a telemarketer, John knows the deal within the first 5 seconds of the sales encounter. So how does he respond? Well, in many cases, your typical John Smith simply hangs out the phone, confident in the fact that he won't be offending anyone he knows. However, let's say this particular John Smith has impeccable manners and doesn't feel comfortable hanging up on someone, even if it's someone is a pushy salesman who's had the audacity to cold call him in the sanctuary of his home. So, instead of hanging up, Mr. Smith says, in a slightly annoyed tone, "This is Mr. Smith, can I help you?" While his inner monologue says to his critical judgment center, in a thoroughly pissed off tone, "Shit, another damn salesman calling my house and interrupting my dinner. I gotta figure out a way to end this call, and then I'm going to put myself on the do not call list." Now, obviously, this is not the sort of inner monologue that sets the stage for the salesman to have any reasonable chance of ultimately closing this deal. In fact, the reality is that the sale was over before it ever started. However, since all Bill Peterson heard was Mr. Smith's outward response, which was, "Can I help you?" he is completely in the dark to this, and he continues on confidently with the sale. "Good evening," he says. "I'm calling to let you know about an incredible opportunity in the ... and as the salesman drones on, explaining this incredible opportunity of his, Mr. Smith's dialogue is already on the attack. "Incredible my ass," says Mr. Smith's inner monologue to Mr. Smith's critical judgment center in his prefrontal cortex. "This guy is so full of shit. If he was in front of me right now, I swear to God I'd wring his damn neck." And suddenly, Mr. Smith realizes that he's being asked a question. Simple as that, Mr. Smith. "I just need to ask you a couple of quick questions, so I don't waste your time. Sound good?" "Sorry, you caught me at a bad time," Mr. Smith replies quickly. "I gotta go." "No problem," Bill Peterson replies. "What's a bet?" Click. And just like that, the sale is over before it even started, another in a long list of blown sales that could have gone the exact opposite way if a million Bill Petersons of the world were aware of what was happening with their prospect's inner monologue and had been taught a simple, yet immensely powerful, strategy to counter it. 10 core influencing tonalities. Before I teach you the specifics of this strategy, there's one crucial distinction that I need to go through first. It has to do with how born closers automatically apply the proper tonality to the words they say, as opposed to everyone else. You see, when you're a born salesperson, you don't have to consciously decide which of the 10 core influencing tonalities you need to apply to your words in order to take control of your prospect's inner monologue and stop it from narrating against you. Your unconscious mind provides this service for you automatically and gets it right every single time. As if by magic, if at any point during the sale it behooves you to sound absolutely certain or utterly sincere or caring and sympathetic or perfectly reasonable or any of the 10 core tonalities that drive human influence, then that very tonality will get layered on top of your words without you having to even think about it. It simply just happens. On the flip side, though, when you're not a born salesperson, a literally ginormous group that includes over 99% of the population, then a breakdown in your internal communication occurs. Specifically, your conscious and unconscious minds fail to link up in a way that allows for the unimpeded exchange of information between the two. In consequence, your outgoing communication ends up becoming a watered-down version of what you'd originally intended, lacking the richness and vibrancy that you thought you had expressed through the use of tonality and body language. You see, unbeknownst to you, the tonality that you thought you had applied had somehow been blocked or impeded from completing its journey out of your mouth to accompany your words, which, for their part, faced no blockage or impediment at all. In other words, the absence of tonality, or, far more frequently, the presence of only a trace amount of tonality in your outgoing communication, was not a conscious choice you made. Rather, you were a victim of a subpar internal communication platform that made you tone deaf, as the phrase goes, at the very instant that your words were escaping your lips and you heard them. With your own ears, you were tricked by your unconscious mind into thinking that you sounded perfect, which is to say, that you sounded just the way you had intended to sound. Yet, in reality, attributes like certainty, confidence, passion, enthusiasm, urgency, empathy, clarity, and other subjective qualities that characterize a well-told story or well-explained concept got lost in translation, victims of a 1-2 punch at the formidable hands of nature and nurture, which send you into adulthood with an internal communication platform that waters down your outgoing messages by allowing your words to flow freely, while it impedes the tonality you've applied. Now, insofar as how this impacts your ability to close on the most basic level, meaning, when you use tonality in the traditional sense, as opposed to taking control of your prospect's inner monologue, you can draw a straight line back to the emotional component of the 3 tends to see the carnage. You see, in the absence of the right tonality, your ability to move your prospect emotionally is severely limited, and your ability to close is also limited accordingly. Remember, it's your words that move a prospect logically, and it's your tonality that moves your prospect emotionally. And in addition to that, we can also use tonality at a much higher level to take control of our prospect's inner monologue and stop it from narrating against us. In fact, it's time to get specific about that. Let's go back to the example of the well-mannered Mr. Smith and his telemarketing nemesis, Bill Peterson, from the Acme Travel Company. The only difference is that this time, Bill Peterson is going to be armed with the tactics and strategies of the straight line system, starting with the simplest of all rules, which states that a salesperson should never address their prospect in an overly formal manner. Instead, the salesperson should address the prospect in the way they would respectfully address a friend. So, instead of saying, "Hi, my name is Bill Peterson, from the Acme Travel Company. I'm looking for Mr. John Smith. Is he home?" which is the equivalent of death, the salesperson should simply say, in a very upbeat tone, "Hi, is John there?" Now, when I say a very upbeat tone, I'm referring to one of the 10 core influencing tonalities called the I care or I really want to know tonality. By applying this sort of upbeat, enthusiastic tonality, while virtually all other salespeople are saying the same words in a perfunctory manner, not only do I immediately stand out from the rest of the pack, but I also begin the process of taking control of my prospect's inner dialogue. In essence, this is about being fully engaged and showing great interest in speaking to your prospect. In other cases, like when you say "How are you?" it goes a long way toward establishing instant rapport with someone and establishing yourself as a person who cares and really wants to know how they're doing. This tonality creates an unconscious psychological connection, because we naturally feel closer to people who express a sincere caring for our well-being. Now, in this particular case, the additional words Mr. Smith heard after "Hi, is John there?" were, "I really want to know. I'm not like the rest of the salesmen who ask you that just to get it out of the way. I genuinely want to speak to him." Now, to be clear, there's a sweet spot here, insofar as just how much peppiness and upbeatness you can layer onto your words until you start to sound disingenuous. In other words, you don't want to say it like Tony the Tiger says, "It's great." I mean, you'd sound like a complete idiot if you did that. You want to be upbeat enough to get your point across, but not so over the top that you sound ridiculous. Remember, tonality is the secret weapon of influence, because it's an unspoken language. Your prospect hears words without you having to say them, and gets influenced without even knowing. So how does Mr. Smith respond? At the same time he's hearing the additional words from Bill Peterson's ambit up greeting and trying to process their meaning, he says, "Yeah, this is John too." Which Bill Peterson immediately breaks out his second core influencing tonality, which is called phrasing a declarative as a question, and he applies it in the following words. "Hi, my name is Bill Peterson, calling from Acme Travel Company in Beverly Hills, California. How are you today?" Now, notice how each one of those 3 thoughts is a declaration. 1. Hi, my name is Bill Peterson. 2. Calling from Acme Travel Company. 3. In Beverly Hills, California. Now, clearly each of those 3 thoughts is a declarative statement, not a question. However, by phrasing them as questions, you've tapped into the power of 3 separate human desires simultaneously. 1. To not be perceived as being out of the loop. 2. To remember people we've met before. 3. To appear generally agreeable. Now watch what happens to the punctuation when Bill Peterson phrases those declaratives as questions. "Hi, my name is Bill Peterson, calling from Acme Travel Company, in Beverly Hills, California. How are you today?" By phrasing each of these 3 statements as questions, back to back, you infer what's called a microagreement, and the additional words Mr. Smith hears are, "Right, right, you've heard of us, right?" Here's another example from my personal life. My daughter was the best salesperson when she was little. She'd say, "Daddy, we are going to the toy store, right? You said so, right?" If you've ever heard kids do that, you know that they naturally know how to use this tonality. Now, when my daughter would do this, naturally I'd go into my head and start searching my memory, thinking, "I don't know, did I?" But she'd already moved the conversation forward and was headed out the door to go to the toy store before I could stop and really think about it. Using this tonality before I knew what was happening, she'd straight line me into the car, to the store, and into buying her the toy she wanted. This is a tonality you want to use sparingly, but it's incredibly powerful in gaining agreement with your prospect. You can either phrase your statement as a question or, in some contexts, just use the exact words as you raise your voice again and again, to which your prospect will hear, "Right, right, right." When Bill phrases his name as a question, Mr. Smith's inner monologue starts saying, "Wait a second, am I supposed to know who this person is? I better hedge my bets and sound like I do." What happens in that very instant, when you phrase a regular statement as a question is that it sends your prospect's brain into search mode as the prospect tries to figure out whether or not they should know the person who's calling. And, again, due to the conscious mind's limited processing power, as long as your prospect remains in search mode, their internal monologue is paralyzed from working against you. Now, to be clear, as powerful as this concept is, you shouldn't delude yourself into thinking that just because you phrased a declarative as a question, your prospect is now going to buy from you. That's simply not how tonality works. Rather, it keeps the prospect in the game by stopping their inner monologue from narrating against you, thereby opening up the possibility for further influence by you, which will come in the form of your next sentence. In fact, at this point in the sale, that's precisely how I want you to be thinking about things, word by word and sentence by sentence. I want you to make sure that each word you've chosen is the absolute best one possible given your desired outcome. More on this later in the chapter on scripting, and that the tonality you've applied allows you to maintain control of your prospect's inner monologue and, as a result, the sales encounter. In this particular instance, the next group of words you're going to say aka. Your next language pattern, in straight line parlance, is going to explain the precise reason why you call the prospect today. In other words, you didn't just call the prospect out of the blue. You didn't call yesterday, you didn't call tomorrow, and you didn't call next week. You called right now, and there's a very specific reason for it. We call this reason a justifier, inasmuch as it creates a justification for your reaching out to the prospect. I'll go through this in more detail in chapter 10, which goes into detail on prospecting, but for now all you need to understand is that when you use a justifier correctly, it will dramatically increase the compliance rate for whatever request you're making. In this case, the request that Bill Peterson is going to make will be for permission to ask Mr. Smith a series of questions so he can begin the intelligence gathering process. However, for now, let's just focus on the justifier itself and the tonality that Bill is going to apply to it, namely, the tonality of mystery and intrigue. Bill says, "Now, John, the reason for the call today is that we've been reaching out to a select group of homeowners in your area to offer them ... and then he'll go on to explain whatever that offer happens to be. It could be a marketing special, where Mr. Smith is going to get free airfare or a free night in a hotel, or it could be the chance to join a vacation club or travel club, or anything else that offers a perceived benefit to Mr. Smith. The way you create mystery and intrigue with this tonality is by lowering your voice to just above a whisper and then hanging on the R in the word reason for an extra fraction of a second. In addition, because you lower your voice to just above a whisper, the reason takes on the properties of a secret, creating a sense of urgency and scarcity, which takes us now to our fourth core influencing tonality, namely, scarcity. In sales, we use the word scarcity to describe a prospect's natural inclination to want more and more of what he or she perceives there to be less and less of. In other words, when a person finds out that something they desire is in short supply or scarce, it makes them desire that something even more. All told, there are actually three types of scarcity. The first type is called verbal scarcity. Verbal scarcity is a state of scarcity created strictly by the use of words. Let's switch examples now and say goodbye to Mr. Smith and Bill Peterson, and let's assume that you're a BMW salesman and a prospect walks into your dealership looking to buy a black 750L with black leather interior, and say you wanted to create verbal scarcity about the model and color of car that prospect wanted. You could say something like, "We only have one black on black 750L left on the floor, and it's going to be 3 months until our next shipment comes in." Pretty straightforward, right? In essence, by explaining to the prospect that the car he wants is in short supply, the salesperson increases the likelihood that the prospect will buy the car now, to avoid the possibility of missing out. In sales, we refer to this process as creating urgency, and it's an integral part of persuading your customer to buy now, as opposed to sometime in the future. In consequence, you should always try to create at least some degree of urgency right before you ask for the order, as it will dramatically increase the likelihood of your prospect saying yes. Now, if the salesperson wanted to increase that likelihood even further, then they could layer the tonality for scarcity on top of the word said. We call the second type of scarcity tonal scarcity. Specifically, tonal scarcity is when you lower your voice to just above a whisper, and then put a little oomph into it, applying that tone of voice to a word or phrase. Triggers a sense of scarcity in the listener's unconscious mind, which then sends a signal to its conscious counterpart in the form of a gut feeling. In other words, tonal scarcity stacks on top of verbal scarcity, so that the sound of your words intensifies the feelings of scarcity in the prospect's gut to a level far beyond what they would have felt from words alone. And that takes us to the third type of scarcity, which is called informational scarcity, meaning the information itself is in short supply. In other words, not only is the black 750L in short supply, but also nobody else is aware of that fact. In essence, informational scarcity compounds the effect of the whisper, turning what is said into a full-blown secret that the prospect feels they can use to gain a personal advantage. Here's how you put it all together. First, verbal scarcity is used to convey the logic. We only have one black on black 750L left, and once it's gone, it's going to be 3 months until our next shipment comes in. Second, you add on tonal scarcity by using a power whisper, which greatly intensifies the prospect's sense of scarcity. And third, you add on informational scarcity by explaining that even the information itself is in short supply. For the next three tonalities, let's jump ahead to the end of the main body of your sales presentation, right to the point where you're going to ask for the order for the first time. In this case, we are going to apply a series of 3 tonal shifts as we ask for the order, starting with a tonality of absolute certainty, then transitioning into a tonality of utter sincerity, and then transitioning again to the reasonable man tone. II. Let me first explain each tonality separately. 1. Absolute certainty. I've already explained this to you in detail in chapter 4, so let me just quickly refresh your memory. In essence, with the tonality of absolute certainty, your voice takes a firmer, more definitive tone, with a power that seems to come right from your solar plexus in order to convey your absolute conviction about whatever you happen to currently be saying. 2. Utter sincerity. This is a calm, smooth, confident, low-pressure tone that implies that what you're currently saying to the prospect is coming directly from your heart, and that you're being absolutely sincere with them at the highest possible level. It's a velvety smooth tone that's so humble and so non-threatening that it sounds almost apologetic in nature, but of course, there's no apology being given. Rather, you're telling someone something that is clearly in their best interest, and hence they would be a fool not to believe what you're saying and take your advice. 3. The reasonable man. This is one of my favorite tonalities, as it's used at some of the most important moments in the sales encounter. In this particular case, we're focusing on how it's used at the close. However, what I want you to understand is that we are also going to be using it at the beginning of the sale, when you ask your prospect for permission to explain the benefits of whatever product or idea you're offering them. In other words, you don't just start pitching your prospect an idea without first saying something along the lines of, if you have 60 seconds, I'd like to share an idea with you. You got a minute? Those last 3 words, got a minute, are when you apply the reasonable man tone, which entails you raising your voice up at the end of the sentence 3 to imply the reasonableness of your statement. In essence, when you use the reasonable man tone, the extra words your prospect hears are, I'm reasonable, you're reasonable, and this is a very reasonable request. And since it's basic human nature to want to obey the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, your prospect feels an unconscious obligation to return your reasonableness in kind, causing them to say yes to your request. Now, when it comes to the close, here's an example of how we put all 3 tonalities together into one tonal pattern. III. First, the typical language pattern for a close would be something along the lines of, if you give me one shot, Bill, believe me, you're going to be very, very impressed. Sound fair enough? Now, let me show you how we take the above 3 tonalities and turn them into a very powerful tonal pattern. IV. First, we start with the tone of absolute certainty, which is applied to the words, you give me just one shot, Bill, and believe me. Next, we smoothly transition from the tonality of absolute certainty to the tonality of utter sincerity, which is applied to the words, you're going to be very, very impressed. And then lastly, we transition from the tonality of utter sincerity to the tonality of the reasonable man, which is applied to the words, sound fair enough? And this implies that you're a reasonable man making a reasonable statement. Remember, you don't want to say sound fair enough in an angry, aggressive tone, or sound fair enough in a nasally poindexter tone, or sound